A very good afternoon and welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting, the first of two today on Monday, the 24th of August 2020 at Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. Once again, we are continuing to hold these meetings virtually, so thank you to all board members, external members, members of the press and public that are all joining us, and of course this will be available to view on many other channels as well. So welcome to the meeting. First of all, I need to read out some housekeeping just regarding how this virtual meeting will be undertaken. Please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Firstly, only speak when invited to by myself as Chairman. Secondly, please state your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Some people may need to dial into the meeting and will therefore not have the benefit of visual. Please mute your microphone when you are not talking to keep background noise to a minimum. If you would like to speak, please type the letters RTS, request to speak, in the instant messaging conversation panel, which for those that are joining the meeting virtually will be in the left-hand side of your screen, and click the arrow button to send. Please note that this panel is visible to all parties that are on the call. If you are able to, it may also be helpful to indicate the particular issue you wish to speak on in order to try and maintain the flow of the meeting. If there are any recommendations that are moved that require a formal vote, these will be carried out by myself as Chairman, asking for a response for, against or abstain from each councillor on the board. The regulations governing virtual meetings require all participants to hear and be heard throughout. Therefore, when voting, I will ask all participants to do so in the acknowledgement that they have heard the debate and have been engaged in the meeting throughout in accordance with the revised regulations. If you do not feel that this has been the case throughout the meeting, please alert me through the chat window and therefore abstain from voting. And finally, should the connection of myself as Chairman be lost throughout the meeting, the Vice Chairman will take over. A short adjournment will then be agreed until the connection is resumed. Viewers of the live feed at that point may see a holding screen throughout the adjournment. For those that don't know, I'm actually away at the moment, so there's a particular likely one. So hopefully, fingers crossed, all connectivity issues may hold up. And finally, could I please ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum as far as possible, and that mobile phones and all other devices are turned off and switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. That ends the housekeeping, so we'll move on to the agenda proper, and if I could pass to Bob for item 1, apologies. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Chairman. We've had 2 apologies from Councillor Iyengar and from Councillor Rigby.
Thank you. And item 2, substitute members.
Yes, we've had 2 substitutes appointed for those councillors named. Councillor Rampton is substituting for Councillor Iyengar and Councillor Northover for Councillor Rigby.
Thank you very much. On to item 3, declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any local interests that they wish to declare for any items on the agenda? I'll go to Councillor Brooke. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. It's in connection with item 7 on the agenda. My daughter and family live in Tattenham Road, which is one of the Tranche 1 schemes. I'm assuming that's just a local interest, but happy to take advice.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooke. Councillor Hadley.
Yes, similarly, I live within the area that's covered by the Stanley Green scheme.
Sorry, Chairman, I didn't catch that. By the
Tattenham Green area, so the same
Green.
Tranche 1 scheme.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Northover. Councillor Lisa Northover.
Yeah, just similar. I live just by the Cleveland Road bridge proposal.
Okay, thank you. So these are all items of probably of local interest under item 7, which are the emergency travel grant orders. Are there any further declarations of interest? I'm not seeing any, in which case we'll move on to item 4, which are 4 and 4A, which are the minutes and action sheet. The board are asked to approve the minutes of the meetings held on the 20th of July and also to note our current action sheet. I'll ask if any members have any points to raise on that. I think I have Councillor Nicola Green. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it is indeed regarding the minutes. I think in an effort to be brief at the meeting itself, Councillor Mike Green and I mirrored our declarations, and I just wonder for the purposes of the minutes whether they could be treated separately. I know it's entirely circular, but it is important that we both made those declarations not only on our behalf but those of our spouse who clearly one another. But if I've sent through some wording which I hope, having spoken with Mr. Hanson, would clarify the situation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Green. We can make sure that that is amended. Any other points on this item regarding the minutes or the action sheet? No, I've got a note from Councillor Peter Miles. Is this regarding an interest that you wish to declare?
Yes, Chair. My parents live in Oakdale as item 7, so just
we'll add that to the list as well. Yeah,
yep.
No problem at all. In which case, if there are no further points on item 4 and 4A, we'll move on to item 5, which are public issues, and I'll pass to Bob for this item. Thank you, Bob.
Chairman, as usual, all the public speaking statements that have been received have been included in the appendices, and members of the committee have had a link to those appendices. 35 statements in all, I think, Chairman, and one petition, all of which are set out in that appendix.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm having some, I don't know whether it was just me that couldn't hear all of that, but yeah, that's fine. I think, could you just repeat that one more time if that was all right?
Chairman, could other members of the committee hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Bob.
Yes, no problem.
Okay. No problem. I think it's just my connection then. So yes, I think we do have a few of the people that had submitted statements that do wish to address the meeting. Only a couple. So I think when we get to that item, we can deal with that then, and as my chairman's discretion. So moving to item number 6, which is the chairman's update. A couple of things to point out. Again, we're still working under the virtual regulations, so thank you for everybody for continuing to bear with us. We're trying to do, as usual, we have 2 meetings of the Aversion Scrutiny Board each month. The aim of to look at all of the decisions that are being made, particularly around the cabinet items, and to give them adequate scrutiny, but also to look at as constructively as possible the issues that are arising and give them a good airing as well. While the global pandemic has been going on under COVID-19, we've been looking in particularly deeply at the Council's response to that, but also the impact on the wider area, which is why item 8 today continues that theme. At the last meeting, we looked at how the tourism and hospitality and business community were coping, and we heard from a number of members of the public and organisations, people from the business improvement districts and the hospitality industry about how their industries were coping. And today we'll be hearing from members of the transport and infrastructure industry about how the COVID pandemic has changed their world, how things are progressing in this we move out of the pandemic, and also things that they wish the council to take an input in. So that will be item 8. The other thing to update in the chairman's update is that we are in the process of finalising the economy and tourism working group that the board committed to forming at the last meeting. We can update the board at the next but one meeting on that a little bit further. So on that basis, I was intending, with the board's approval, of moving items 7 and 8 around. Item 7 is the scrutiny of the transport and infrastructure related cabinet reports. But of course, item 8 is where we've got the external speakers joining us. So as we've already got them on the call, it seems sensible to bring them in now and then let them have them, let them disappear afterwards rather than letting them hang around. So unless I hear any other objections to that, I will move on straight on to item 8, which is the item on the COVID-19 recovery. Yeah, I think we seem fine with that. So moving on to that, we've got a number of guests joining us, specifically around the transport and infrastructure sectors, and a little bit like the last meeting, what we've asked them to do is to come and address the meeting and give a little bit of just a 10-minute conversation, 10-minute presentation on how their industry has changed, how they're coping, but also specifically things that they think that the council can and should be doing to improve their areas of interest. So we were due to have with us today a representative from South Western Railway, some representative from the local bus companies, somebody from the chairman of BH Active Travel, and also Access Dorset, which is the voice of those with accessibility issues. We've had noticed that the Access Dorset people are unable to join us. It was always going to be a struggle. They'd made that very clear from the beginning, but hopefully we can hear from them at a later date. But we do have a number of the other members joining. So again, the idea of the format is that if we hear from each of the representatives for 5-10 minutes about what they think is important in their areas, we can then have 5 or 10 minutes to ask any questions from members of the board, and then after that we can move on to the next representative. So unless I'm getting any prodding from anybody about anything different, we'll move straight into item 8 of the agenda, and I think the first person I've got on the order of speaking is Andrew Ardley, who's a regional development manager from South Western Railway. Andrew, are you on the call with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Councillor. Yes,
thank you for going first, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much for inviting us to take part in this discussion. I'll just very brief update as to what we've been doing in the last few months, but really want to concentrate on sort of looking ahead, really. So obviously, like all transport, back in March when the lockdown came, we had to go very quickly into a different mode, and that involved in a very different timetable. We had to cut back on the number of services quite quickly. Mainly to make sure we had enough resources to operate it, but also to reflect the changes in travel patterns. Obviously, we also had to very quickly introduce a number of different measures. So new technology in terms of cleaning trains. You might have seen some of the information about this new product called Zuno about cleaning trains. We've also been improving cleaning of stations. So we put a lot of effort into that and into educating customers about wearing masks. Obviously, since that became mandatory. What that's meant for us at the same time is obviously that meant a big drop off in income. So we very quickly, the government, to be fair, went into with all train operating companies, went into what's called an emergency measures agreement, which basically meant we're operating effectively a management contract from the end of March, and that is still in place. It's due to be reviewed next month in September. So really, there's a lot of things I could say about what we've been doing the last few months, but I think really what I'd like to do is concentrate on sort of looking ahead, really. So I think for us, the big thing, and I think for everybody, what we're noticing is that it's already leading to a change in travel patterns, particularly in the areas where we see a lot of commuting. We can see already that, and it was already happening pre-COVID, that there was a drop-off in people travelling 5 days a week, and I think this is clearly going to accelerate it with more people using technology. So we're very conscious that's likely to happen, but also I think we're expecting more people to move, as you've seen a trend of people moving further away, particularly from London and places like Surrey, further out, and I suspect the BCP area is going to be one of the places people are looking to move to. So one of the things that may happen is that we see people perhaps commuting to work less often, but they may perhaps still need to make business trips to London maybe once or maybe twice a week. So it will change patterns. It will reduce travel to a degree, we think, but it won't necessarily stop travel altogether. But we also think quite likely that it will lead to probably more leisure travel as well, and that's an area we're going to have to focus on in making the rail industry more attractive for leisure travel. For us, what does that mean, and what does that mean for our partners, including BCP Council? For me, I think it means investing in quality, both in our stations and in our trains. So at the moment, the trains are very much designed, and this is based on the franchise agreement with government, very much based on commuting capacity, particularly into London, and the timetable and the trains are designed around that. I think there's a general acceptance that, particularly if we're going to encourage more leisure travel, we may have to go back and look at the layout of trains, particularly say for luggage space, perhaps more group seating, that type of thing. But that also needs to extend to things like ticketing arrangements. There's been a lot of debate in the press about future flexible ticketing to reflect commuting patterns. So that's something we've put proposals to DfT, and hopefully we'll hear back on that fairly soon. And then obviously there's other things we may want to look at, such as new products, again, that are suitable for the leisure market. But I think for me, I think in terms of working partnership with the council, I think what we need to do is look at stations in particular and look at how we can improve those and make those really attractive. Commuters tend to be in and out of stations fairly quickly, but leisure travellers and perhaps those who travel less often will expect something perhaps a little bit different. So if you take Bournemouth Station, for example, there's no waiting room, and in on the downside towards Weymouth, so in the winter that can be quite uncomfortable, and toilets, we acknowledge, at Bournemouth are not great. So there's facilities like that. I think we're going to have to work with partners such as BCP as to how we improve those. And we're going to have to bid for funding to government to make that a reality, and working with partners such as yourselves, that's going to be really crucial. And then there's other issues like the first and last mile. How do we get people to and from stations? And that's something we're very keen on, and we're very pleased to see the work going in terms of the barrel bikes, in terms of getting people to and from the station, in terms of shared bikes. And we'd like to see that scheme extended to the electric bikes, I think, is being considered. And we welcome the investment that's going into things like cycle routes and bus routes to and from stations. So I think what we're looking to do is we're also looking at the long term. So again, BCP are part of the stakeholder group that's working with us. They're looking at the long term improvements for the railway through Dorset. But that could mean more services through the conurbation. But as I say, that's got to be matched by improvements to facilities at stations. It's got to be the whole product. It's not just a case of putting on more trains. The whole package from leaving home to the destination has to work. And obviously buses, again, are a really important part of that package. So I think for me, the last thing to say is intelligence is key, and something we'd be quite keen to consider with you perhaps is how do we together understand what this future pattern of demand might look like. What intelligence can we do? Can we work with businesses and can we work with your contacts with your local residents to understand what people will expect to see in the future? What would they like to see? What would they think their travel patterns might be in the future? So I think that's an interesting area to explore. So I'll leave it for that and say happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that very useful update. It's changing all of us, isn't it? It's something that this is a pandemic in every single area, so it's interesting to hear from that. So I have a couple of people asking questions. I'll go to Councillor Farquhar first. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's very interesting to hear the thoughts from the train operating company here, particularly about working with residents through BCP for what their travel patterns will be, etc., and so on and so forth. So, if I could just ask my question around that, is that, or just make an observation, should I say, is that I know for a long time that season tickets, which obviously you're looking to the future to say that we may well not become a commuter town, other than perhaps 2 times a week or maybe a few times a month for those which are travelling to their work because they're working remotely. is that what consideration has been given to the demand from travellers and who are our residents within BCP as regards flexible season tickets? Because one of the complaints which I've had from my particular ward is that particularly women that work part-time, maybe 3 days a week because they have children's care and so on and so forth, have repeatedly, not just off South West Railways, but also the previous train operating companies, have asked for more flexibility than just being stuck with the, well, you must buy the 5-day-a-week season ticket for the year and tough duties. And what that has is it's impacted greatly those residents that have childcaring duties, particularly within the women's sector, that are doing, for want of a better term, part-time jobs because of their other lifestyle. So my first question would be, what view do you have on that to South Western Rail, please?
Andrew?
Yes, certainly. So yeah, as I say, we've put some proposals into government for a flexible ticketing option, very much along the lines of what Councillor Falco was talking about, and all other train operating companies are putting similar proposals into government as well. So as I say, because we're in this emergency measures agreement, we have to have any significant changes to ticketing arrangements agreed by government. So we'll wait and see what they come back with. But I think government definitely recognises a need to make ticketing more flexible, and in particular in the season ticket area. We have also got a product already out there. There's two things. We've got the smart card ticket, which is called Tap to Go, which allows you can tap in and out at stations, and that it will give you the best value fare for the travel on the train for that day. And we also do have a Carnet option out there, which gives about a 5% discount when you buy 10 journeys. But hopefully this new product we proposed to government, more flexible lot of season, will hopefully get approval fairly soon.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I now have Councillor Mike Brooke. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. I'll just try and bring up the video again. Yes, interested in the sort of suggested improvements for the future over what are likely to be the long term. More interested at the moment, as a first question, in the recent past and the very current future, as it were, the immediate future. We've seen videos of hordes and hordes of people getting off the trains at Bournemouth station, vast majority of them not wearing masks, and obviously in terms of the coaches, absolutely no social distancing. And yet you are travelling, or they are travelling under regulations which are supposed to give social distancing and wearing masks. Now that's clearly a grave concern for residents here as these numbers get off and go down to the beach and through the town. So what are you actually doing to ensure that our weekend visitors or our day trippers are actually abiding by the rules which the government has laid down, and that you yourself are, or your company is following the rules and regulations as supposed to be? That's the first question. Can I just mention the second and then have both answered at the same time? And the second question, again, you've mentioned the improvements you want to make to Bournemouth Station and various other stations. Where's the commitment for the improvements that should be taking place at Folkestone Station?
Okay, shall I pick those up? Is that okay? So firstly, in terms of the short term, yes, we're very conscious of the issues, some of the peak travel down to Bournemouth particularly. So we've done a lot of work putting in social media, particularly aimed at those younger people who've been causing some of the issues. We have messaging at stations, we've got posters, we have announcements. We've got a lot of different measures in place to try and persuade people to use face coverings. Generally, it's been quite successful, but ultimately, the railway staff can't enforce it. Ultimately, only the police, BTP, the British Transport Police, or the standard police can enforce it. So we do everything we possibly can to to encourage people to use masks, both on the station and on trains, and we do announcements on trains as well. But ultimately, stations, so railway staff can't actually enforce it themselves. So, as I say, that is continuing. We're continuing to do that through social media. Network Rail are backing it up as well, and I know other operators are doing the same. In terms of Folkestone, it's been quite a long haul on this one, and we've recently put in a report to Department for Transport with a number of different options to go ahead with the lifts at the station. So that's been with the Department for Transport now since early July, and we're hoping for a response from them very shortly. So we've done a lot of technical work. It's been a very complex project to come up with proposed solutions. So we'll hopefully hear on that soon. The proposal we put in, as I've discussed with the local councillors, involves building new lift shafts and replacing the bridge with a substantial contribution from Network Rail, and with the potential to include some options for further enhancements to the station building. So I've been in discussion with councillors and colleagues in the Towns Fund, who are managing the Towns Fund, see if there's a way of linking the other work in Boscombe to improvements at the station. So there's a lot of work gone into it, and we'll hopefully hear from DFT shortly.
Thank you very much, Andrew. For board members' information, we had actually previously requested South Western Railway to come back to us. We did have a big discussion about the Folkestone station a few board meetings ago, and we had asked them to come back. But I know, as Andrew had pointed out, that a lot of work has been going on behind the scenes with the ward councillors and others in the meantime. So that's why we invited them here for this item rather than specifically a Folkestone update, because it does seem to be being dealt with by the ward councillors in particular. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Farquhar, you wish to come back with a second question?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Chair. It follows on the backside of Councillor Brooke question around the crowding on the trains. It's disappointing to hear the reply that only BTP, British Transport Police, can enforce the wearing of masks. That seems to be at odds to other transport providers such as buses, who have taken very proactive steps such as blocking off seats and enabling their bus drivers to deny access to somebody that comes. Now that may be confrontational, etc. So it wasn't really an acceptable answer to public safety as far as I'm concerned, particularly when we see in the local press and the local social media, and in fact in the national press, hordes upon hordes of visitors to the town, which are very welcome at any other time than in the middle of a pandemic, descending off the trains, and then as Andrew has said, that first mile and last mile, because it's not linked up yet, streaming down through the town. And from our perspective, and what I'd like to make clear from the residents' perspective, is it felt like an invasion. Now, because of the party I'm with the Labour Party, I've had communications from the unions, the RMT, is that they communicated with South West Rail, the train operating company, their concerns as regards the enforcement, and not just the face mask, but the concerns related to the mass of people that were anticipated when lockdown was eased, that would use the train services. So I'd just like to understand from South West Rail's side of things how those communications were dealt with, and those concerns were dealt with from the union, who they have members in the guards, etc., and on station staff, were communicated to the local authority, in this particular case the BCP, particularly because I think a contributing factor to the declaring of the major incident was due to the fact that we had so many people visit the towns by using the transport route of South West Rail. So consequently, my question is what communications did you get from the union for their concerns prior to that major incident? How did you deal with them, and how did you communicate to the local authority what those concerns that were raised by the union from the workers who actually work on the front line, e.g. the guards and the station staff?
Okay, so obviously we have regular discussions, we have regular meetings with the company council that represents frontline staff, and we have regular meetings with the authority. So yeah, we obviously we knew that there would be potential pressures, but there are limits to what we can actually do. I think the thing to bear in mind is that they're not all getting on at one station. They're potentially getting on unstaffed stations as well. It's not a case they're all getting on, say, at Southampton or one particular stop. So you know, you can't just suddenly stop people getting on a train midway through its journey. I think what we're trying to do is, again, use intelligence and try and with the council try and predict when things are going to happen. And we do have queuing systems at stations, for example, to manage queues so you don't end up having large groups of people on platforms. But ultimately, and this is not just us, this is all train operators, yeah, all we can do is follow the guidance, give people plenty of guidance, and we can't necessarily stop them getting on trains at unstaffed stations particularly. But the important thing is we manage it as best we can at the stations where we've got staff. The guidance, as both the staff at the stations and on the train, do give guidance to people if they're not giving masks, but they can't actually physically enforce it, is what I'm saying. It doesn't mean they won't try and give them advice. It just means they can't find them, they can't stop them travelling. So there's plenty of communication going on, and so I think we've done everything we possibly can, but we're very happy to work with the council on any future issues coming up. But say there are limits as to what we can do.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think I have one final, hopefully quick question from Councillor Trent, and then we'll let you go. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, there was talk about there's less commuters and the nature of travel is changing. A lot of people take cycles on trains and then get off the other end and cycle. At the moment, there's a limit on each train as to the number of cycles that it can take before it's refused, and the same thing really applies for walking aids and so on. And I wonder whether there is a potential, if there are less commuters, to modify the rolling stock slightly to allow for the transport of more cycles. I wonder whether that is being looked at.
Yes, certainly something we'll definitely give thought to, and I say it won't just have to be us; it'll have to be other train operators as well. So I think this will have to be a part of discussion with Department for Transport and others, because at the moment the number of seats on trains and increase in seats is tied into franchise agreements. But I think there's certainly a discussion on look in the future, but it's not just about cycles. So I'm conscious that we need more space for luggage, for example. And there's a real balance to be achieved there. It's not a simple one, although there may be a little bit less pressure on trains. There still will be busy morning trains. We, for example, have to carry a lot of students to colleges, for example. They will still be travelling. So there will need to be, I think, a review about future rolling stock, but it won't necessarily happen overnight. Another thing to bear in mind is that we could potentially convert a whole carriage for bikes, and it's still potentially you could fill it. So my preferred option, I think, whilst we can carry bikes, I think one of the better solutions is, like BCP is doing, is having the shared bikes available at stations, so you don't have to take your bike on the train in the first place. I appreciate there are some circumstances, like if you're going for a leisure cycle, where it may be slightly different, but the long term, the better solution really is to have bikes at each end, so that you can maybe cycle to the station where you get your train, pick up the train, and then when you get off the train, there's another alternative. It could be a bus, it could be a shared bike, it could be a shared car, but you've got those options at the other end, so you don't necessarily have to take your own bike. Because I say, at the end of the day, we'll never be able to realise the whole demand for potentially taking bikes on trains. But I do appreciate, yeah, there is potential to increase some capacity in the long term.
Great, thank you very much for that answer, and thank you very much for joining us, Andrew. It's been very interesting to hear some of the challenges and opportunities we face, and we look forward to inviting you back in the future to find out how things are progressing. So thank you very much for joining us, Andrew.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. you. In which case, now we'll move on. We have a few other speakers again on this theme of what the new world is looking like. I'll move next to Jason Falconer, who's the chairman of BH Active Travel, obviously very of the moment in terms of sustainable travel. Again, Jason, the floor is yours for 5-10 minutes to give us an update on the activities in particular of BH Active Travel, but also your thoughts on sustainable travel going into the future. Thanks for joining us, Jason.
Hello, good afternoon.
You're here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Right, so I've met some of you before on other occasions. The BH Active Travel Forum is now, as it's called, it was the Bournemouth Cycling Forum, which started in the mid-1990s, and it was a group of concerned residents, some councillors and a lot of officers that wanted to see better situations for people travelling actively. Fast forward 20 years, and we're now at a point at which the government is now forwarding our proposals and making those moves in a really, really big way. I've been the chair for 2 years now, and since COVID started about 20 weeks ago, I've been making weekly educative blog posts on BH Active Travel website about the realm that we're working in and what we do. And just to cut back to the beginning of lockdown and COVID, the lack of traffic on the road, I think, gave us all a glimpse into how beautiful it was with very livable streets. And that activity, coupled with scootering, walking, and the other things that families were getting involved in, it was a real difference, and a really enjoyable difference that gave us a glimpse of what living streets might have been like. During the whole time we've been in dialogue with engineers, and we could look at it now as being there's two tranches of the Emergency Active Travel Funds. Now, the first tranche of that was lots of the schemes that we've now seen, like Evening Hill and so on, and there was some original footway widening as well as part of that. And that money had to be used very quickly, and it was implemented very quickly. I should remind you that we were asked all those 20 weeks ago to contribute to what might be a little bit of a solution for things in COVID, and we put in some contributions, and Evening Hill was one of those things. 24th of July, and councillors were also asked about this, and it might have been a lower priority for them then, but in the last few weeks it's become a very high priority to everybody's perception now. So we've got the second tranche of work coming along, and also with the second tranche of funding and the second tranche of schemes that are going to be implemented by BCP, we are really pleased to be able to say we're in full support of them. They show great leadership and changes on the roads, and they're also backed with many things that the government have announced. The officers now working in the Highways Department have the Local Transport Note 20, which tells them about the type of schemes that they want to see on the ground. And from the perspective we've been talking to engineers about over the years, this is a user-related experience, how it is to actually travel actively on two wheels or walking. And there's a big difference now. The paint lines on the ground now are no longer a thing. So the things that you've seen on Evening Hill, the light segregation as it's called, which could be that, or a built curb, an actual physical segregation of moving traffic there, is what is written into upcoming schemes. So in a way that is now written for us, the type of things that we've been asking for a lot of years, they're written into those. We've also had changes in highway code. We've also had Boris Johnson announcing we will make England a cycling nation again, and all this stuff is absolutely to the tune of what we have been requesting for quite a lot of years now. We draw examples from other places and we propose them to engineers. We have been contributing to those meetings and project management meetings with, so for example, Lansdowne scheme, we've been invited to those over lots of previous occasions, and we do tend to also still have to ask for regular meetings. The highways guys and the engineers are working really at their best capacity, and I do believe they have the very latest information, a real game changer came earlier in the year when a guy called Brian Deegan came, who talks to engineers. He teaches engineers about building for active travel, and he's given your officers the skills to be able to bring in the things that are exactly what we really requested. It's a great time for it. I'm looking forward to seeing the next tranche of schemes coming forward, especially Whitecliff. These things are going to complement the work that the council have done already with the first set of activities, and I really believe that they are fantastic changes. The Old Town High Street in Poole, you know, I was there a couple of days ago at the Riptide Cafe. There's new businesses opening now that are taking advantage of those things and making the most of the difference between livable streets and streets that are just made for moving cars, and we fully appreciate those things. Okay, what else could I say very quickly? It's all very positive from the perspective of the user at the moment. We would like to work with the media and the comms very much more. I think that the presentation of a lot of the things that are going on with what are called low traffic neighbourhoods, they kind of come from an engineer's background in a big perspective. So using the letters ETRO, it misses a lot of people's attention unless they're real readers and are following the subject. They just see it as sometimes an infringement on their ability to drive everywhere. There's never going to be any road closures, but there's a difference between a through road and a road which is modally filtered, which is part of the future solution here and becoming more in the case all of the UK. So yeah, the mediation of it, these schemes, if we can meet with comms and we can do some actual pictorial evidence, if we can show people of different demographics and ages riding the routes at which have been put in, that would be fantastic, and we'll be requesting those into the next few weeks and months. Our next meeting is the Tuesday the 8th of September, which happens to be the day before your next full council meeting, where you'll be discussing the schemes in full. So we'll be talking about those, and we'll be suggesting before that on the blogs, we'll be suggesting some of the ways that low traffic neighbourhoods are more of an area wide intervention with perhaps several more point filters, whereby you're creating an area of about 1 kilometre square, which is given to then making journeys which are only originating or terminating journeys and not through journeys. It's a very important factor if you're really serious about making the roads equitable, better for people walking, scooting. You know, the concerns that are being raised by us and other people of the countries when the schools go back post-COVID, if parents don't rearrange their travel habits, you know, if they don't kind of make an effort to get there as they have been doing, is going to be pretty tricky. That the cars, the amount of vehicles on the road doesn't actually work in the current framework. So there's quite a few things I've covered there. We'd like to do more communication with engineers and with the mediation of your upcoming work, and we're finding it actually is excellent work. So if you'd like to ask any questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jason, for that that introduction. I have a few colleagues looking at asking questions, so I'll go in order. I've got Councillor Mike Green. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to clarify what you said right at the beginning, Jason, regarding the ETROs, and that was that you were asked to get involved and to comment, etc., about 20 weeks ago. Is that right?
But this has just been a normal matter of course communication with Councillor Hadley and Councillor Slade. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. Basically, you said you were asked involved about 20 weeks ago, and also just a request. I understand, having spent a lot of time on the transport portfolio, etc. I understand the difference between a road closure as such and a modal filter or a point filter. Yeah. But I think given that about 85% of journeys are made by car rather than other modes, I think it is probably for clarity and for understandability that I think just talking about road closures should be considered acceptable in this way, and that's what we should call them.
Okay, and that's a fair point, Mike. I was going to mention that I have seen you cycling to the town hall on previous occasions, as I have Councillor Johnson. I hope she's here. Hello. So you are leading by example on that. The difficulty that you've got with calling road closures that is people have this fear that they can't actually go and park where they want. That was never actually a suggestion. We're seeing culturally this big moment, actually. It's very interesting and people with a lot more brains than me have written about this in other educative forums. People are suffering from what they see as loss aversion. So what they think they might not be able to do, like drive all the way along the East Overcliff, is not as attractive as what we might have as losing, you know? So it's difficult really, but the mediation of these things is really, you know, part of making it attractive. Those journeys of less than 3 miles, 15 to 20 minutes by bike, they're the ones that you can lead by, and making those attractive is the key.
Thanks, Jason. I've got a few other speakers wishing to ask questions. I'll go to Councillor Farquhar. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jason. That was a quite excellent presentation for the perspective of the idea behind the EAT scheme, as I call them, the emergency active travel schemes. I think to Councillor Green's 2 points, whereby this terminology about road closure, I could just give you some positive feedback in support of that, is that when the term road closure is used, then my inbox, as well as many other councillors, was absolutely inundated with angry residents that believed that they wouldn't be able to access their house, they wouldn't be able to access their business, they wouldn't be able to access the parking spaces, etc. So I think language is very, very important, and I do take your point that it's very important in the way that the local authority communicates these, particularly since this is a new way of doing things in that. That is for me. So I just wanted to support you on that. I don't really have a question for you because your presentation was so excellent, and I do want to point out or highlight the fact that, yes, it's important that the local authority communicates the successes and about the demographics. I'm a great believer in a picture paints 1,000 words. So infographics is something that the council used to do, and I think they need to do more of, particularly with such as Evening Hill, etc., that shows the demographic of how people are using it in easily to digest information. Because the point which you raised, that people don't have the time, and by people I mean residents, to drill into all this terminology. Yeah. They pick up the wrong end of the stick and then are very anti because they picked up the wrong end of the stick as regards what the objective is. So on that particular point, Chair, I'd like to propose that we offer up a vote of thanks to the officers and from Growth and Infrastructure and Transport, because they have embraced the opportunity given us by the Emergency Active Travel Scheme. And not only did they get an uplift in tranche number 1, which allows so many of the schemes, and to Councillor Green's other point, is that the consultation with Jason was the same as a consultation that was with all members of the public, where ideas were encouraged to come forward. And it's those 1,000-odd suggestions that those officers put forward to secure an uplift on tranche 1. And I'd also like to thank them for being forward-thinking enough to actually put forward a bid for an increase to tranche 2, so that based upon the evidence, the actual evidence from the phase 1 works that are in place, that we have the opportunity to secure the funding to make those a reality. So that's what I propose, is that the Chair, is that the board offers up a vote of thanks to the officers from Growth and Infrastructure and Transport and the other departments for their very good work in securing, in a very short time frame, money from the active travel, the emergency active travel scheme fund.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. I would make if I could make a polite suggestion. We have a whole item devoted to the Emergency Active Travel Fund programme in the next item. So what I'd suggest is that while we've got the guests in front of us, where we're looking at slightly the bigger picture, obviously this is part of it, that we try and keep the focus on that at the moment, and then we've got plenty of time in the second half of the meeting to explore your point and others. So that would be my suggestion at this time, because we've only got these colleagues with us for a limited time. So let's see if we can drill down. Councillor Earl wishes to come next. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, but it is going to be a little bit on the Emergency Active Travel Scheme, but I do have a very specific question for Jason. Hi, Jason.
If you've got a question for Jason, then I'd go for it. And then if there are more general comments about the scheme, let's leave them to the next item.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Jason. I'm really pleased with the Conservative government who have taken a very progressive approach, I think, with the Emergency Active Travel Scheme and encouraging that move away from cars and car dependence and giving that mechanism to local authorities to be able to make those changes as a trial. I certainly think it's clear that cycling has had a really big uptake, particularly through lockdown as people use it for exercise. And there's now a massive demand for bikes and there's no supply. But I just wanted to ask you, Jason, have you been able to gather any data on the rise in uptake, either here in BCP or even if there's any national statistics about it, just so the committee can have a bit of a flavour of the scale of it? And also, my second question is what do you think is the biggest barrier for taking up cycling, just so we can, take a look at that as part of tranche 2 and look at why people might not be welcoming it in the same way as cyclists do. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, nice to see you, Councillor Earl. There's a couple of points there. The bike shops obviously snowed under and not even able to make all the repairs that they need to, so they're struggling with it. The bike industry is struggling to get the parts from China, in effect. So it's a bit difficult to get data from them at the moment. I know Councillor Hadley has been looking at the counters which are installed in the ground, and I've seen recent data from Evening Hill on that. There is lots of other ones of those that are in the ground that I've not heard any results from, to be honest. And I have asked the cycling officer, Lawrence Harrell, to give us some more data on that, because, yeah, it was a real moment where you could actually see it daily, the amount of users there is. I do believe there is still quite a lot of users out there that might not have been cycling before COVID. You mentioned about keeping that going. It's the roads are fearful for a lot of people simply because of motor traffic, and it means that although I work for Sostrans promoting leisure routes, so it's quite easy to sell leisure routes to people where there isn't any traffic, but to get people to make that mode shift is quite difficult. I know the leader is very keen on introducing more cycle training, and that's something that I did for a lot of years before previously, and also did a lot for the council in my freelance role. I think if you do need to train people to feel safe on the road, though, there's something that needs changing about the road. And that brings us back to that point of, light segregation as the beginning point of which you're building routes that are separate from moving motor vehicles. We are lucky in Bournemouth and Poole. There's loads of massively wide avenues that can be treated, and I think those things are the things that are on the second tranche of activities, and they should continue to be. So I hope that's a couple of answers for you on that. And just generally, if you're leading by example, and I do believe that BCP that they are leading by example, that's what's going to show through. The bids that Councillor Farquhar talked about. Actually, the reason why they've won is because the engineers have put in really good bids, and there was other administrations all over the country that are really struggling with it because they simply don't have a political will to do those things, and we do have that right now. So I just want to make another one point, if I might, Councillor Broadhead. One thing is that the overview and scrutiny panel here are going to be overviewed themselves by a new government agency, which is called the Active Travel England. So it's going to be a new regulatory branch of government ministers and officers that are going to be sent to local authorities all over the UK, that are going to talk to them about what they've implemented with the funds from EATF and more, and what their plans are. And being as you also won a significant amount of money with the Transforming Cities Fund, it looks pretty rosy to be able to continue along this this development of our active urban area, I hope.
Thank you very much, Jason. No, very valid points. It's very much the direction of travel at the moment, isn't it, as well? So I'm very conscious of time. We've got a few more speakers and we're already running over time. So I've got a couple more speakers, hopefully, that can be questioners that can be brief. Councillor Brooke and then Councillor Miller. Councillor Brooke?
Fine, thank you, Chair. It's not a question, but it's just pick up on the point that Jason made and George responded to as well, in terms of communication. I think it is absolutely critical that communication is ongoing and not just dependent upon a series of set dates. I know regulations on the TROs require a certain period of time, but actually what is important is for councillors, all councillors, to be involved in these organisations like BH Active. Jason comes to our surgeries on a regular basis, so he keeps us informed, updated, makes suggestions which can be passed on. And it does mean that there is more evidence-based information coming through. When you have these short, sharp consultations based upon drawings or statements which don't necessarily explain clearly what's happening, you tend to get knee-jerk reactions. And I think we've got to avoid those sort of reactions and work and base upon the evidence that comes towards us. And I'll certainly illustrate that with examples when we come to the next section of the agenda. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. And Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jason. Good to see you again. I think you said in part of one of your answers, we're at the beginning point here, and the government has obviously kicked the active travel point up the agenda really recently. You've been doing this for, I think, 20 years, and been well ahead of the game. So it'd be just useful to know if we're at that beginning point, what effective, where are we in the curve here? What further advice do you have for us? And just a brief question, if I may, Chair, also. Jason, you'll be aware we've got a perennial problem as councillors in terms of the promenade and how we sort of balance the needs of the different users on the prom. And it just be useful to have any feedback you've got about that issue. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you, Councillor Miller. So the promenade one I'll just deal with very briefly. It seems to me, after the endless conversations that I do have about it, it needs widening outwards onto the sand, and that's been proposed by some of your colleagues in previous times. As to where we are, I think I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago about being at sort of stage 3 of culture change, whereby generally now people know, they're educated about the fact that other cities in UK and the world have made major inroads into reducing motor traffic across urban areas. And it's something they've seen when they've been on holiday. I'd imagine that Councillor Broadhead's seen some of these things going on in Germany right now, to be honest. And it's awareness that's there, but the actual habits that people have are those ingrained things. And to me, it doesn't make, it just makes common sense to ride a journey of a couple of miles. It's nothing. Bournemouth Pool, the distance between Bournemouth Pool is so small. But we've had 50 years of car priority. And if we are now, and the country is changing the built environment around active travel, through the measures that all councils are being directed to do, that's where people are going to start really picking it up. I just think there's a really big latent demand, and people don't not want to do it. It's like that they just have to be given the environment to make it resistible, to be honest. And more power to you and everything that you can initiate to bring that about.
Great, thank you very much, Jason, and thank you for joining us and giving a bit of a flavour on what's happening in your world. So thank you to all the colleagues for involvement on that as well. As I mentioned, we do have item 8 or 7 on the agenda is about a number of these schemes that we are actually dealing with. So we will have time to talk more about that a little bit later on. So we'll now move on to the bus companies, and we've got the operations director from Go South Coast, More Bus, and also the managing director of Yellow Buses. So I'll go to More Bus first, and we have David Lee Kong joining us, who's their operations director. Thank you very much for joining us, and you have 5-10 minutes to give us an insight into your world. Thanks, David.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Broadhead. I mean, for us, like the rest of the industry, the passenger transport industry, immediately following lockdown, passenger numbers slumped to just about 10% of what we would have expected to carry. And of course, for us, we, in the conurbation of BCP, we employ just under 500 colleagues, some of whom were also at risk to the disease, and we needed to make sure that we looked after them as well. So it presented a number of challenges on two fronts. One of the things that sort of happened at that time, of course, was the government messaging as well about avoiding public transport where absolutely possible. And although the government messaging has changed and they've stopped saying that, people haven't heard that change. And therefore, if you were to go into the street in Bournemouth or Poole or Christchurch and ask people whether they should be travelling by bus or not, most of them will still tell you that they think the advice is not to travel by public transport. And that is something fundamentally that we collectively have got to challenge and tackle going forward. Now, our aim as a business is to try and rebuild our passenger numbers, and at present in the current climate during the summer, we've managed to grow that 10% of where we were last year to 50% of where we were. And clearly, we've still got a long way to go. We are anticipating that there'll be further demand in September when people start going back to work who have been furloughed as changes to the furlough scheme takes place. Throughout the crisis, we've kept in close discussion with officers from BCP, and we've welcomed the support from them and from the council as a whole, both in terms of some of the payments we've received through our contracted services and payments for older and disabled people using buses. And of course, we've got the challenge ahead of us of September and the return of schools and how we tackle that. Again, we've provided a number of solutions to officers in the last week or so. Now it's become clearer what's happening there, and we're looking at providing extra buses across the network where we can to support that. But as I'm sure as everyone will appreciate, no bus operator has fleets of buses and hundreds of drivers parked up waiting for something like this to happen. So it's a case that it's using the resource we've got as best we can, but we have got extra buses out. When lockdown happened initially, we reduced our service levels to sort of partly meet the demand. And early on in that stage, the government announced a bus service support grant to help keep the funding of bus services going for key workers. And as times moved on, that has continued to be provided, such that we, from September, we will be operating almost 100% in terms of our network mileage as we operated prior to COVID. I think that's already been mentioned. It's the concerns and understanding what the new travel patterns are going to be. One of the positives about operating bus services in the conurbation of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole is that demand for travel comes from a variety of sources. You've got commuters, you've got home to school transport and educational requirements, but you've also got the people going shopping and obviously there is a leisure market there, and it's how we continue to serve those needs, but also react to the changes in that demand. In terms of where we are at the moment, as I say, we are operating, but the capacity on the vehicles has been reduced to approximately, well, just under 50% of what a vehicle is designed to carry. And in some cases, that means that the economic, if this continues and we didn't get any support, then the economics of bus travel just doesn't stack up, because the number of people that you can get on the bus and the cost of providing that service, when you take into account driver wages, fuel and depreciation and so on, it just means that it would not be economically viable. But thankfully, we're in a position where, because of the funding we're getting and the fact that passenger numbers are growing, that is an issue that is sort of there, but hasn't come to the fruition at the moment. Obviously, because of this sort of drive, as people have returned to their cars in particular more than they have to public transport, and obviously it's good to hear about the people embracing active travel. But one of our concerns is obviously air quality, and of course the bus can play an important part in maintaining or improving air quality as people switch to that, and we've got cleaner and more fuel efficient vehicles on the roads. Obviously we've been involved in some of the temporary schemes that have come in, and obviously there's been a need to react quite quickly to things, but we just want to make sure that the bus user is always considered in these. It's not the bus operator per se, it's the bus user that should be the important person to consider when we're developing schemes. And I guess for us really, it's trying to get through the autumn and understand where things develop and how things continue to change in terms of passenger demand, but also we're keen to keep that eye on the future horizon and how we can work with the council on the Transforming Cities Fund, the improvements at Boscombe, and also the lessons that we've learnt from Operation Heatwave this summer, and how we can further develop that for next summer. So I guess that's it from me, but I'm quite happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, David. What I might suggest is if we go to David Squire first, and then we can take the questions together collectively. It might be the right course of action at this stage. So, David, I'll move over to you on behalf of the Managing Director of Yellow Buses. Thank you for joining us, David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting us, and welcome and good afternoon to everybody else on the call. Unfortunately, David Lee Kong has probably stolen most of my fun, because pretty much everything he said I completely agree with. Certainly in terms of our numbers on the Yellow Bus network, I think we kind of spiked at a low of 8% in those first few weeks of full lockdown. And I think, I pay tribute to the resilience of our own staff, but also the council officers in helping us to readjust services and networks very quickly to try and match that to the demand, particularly of key workers and particularly to those people that still needed to travel to RBH and the other hospitals around the area. Probably one thing that David didn't mention, which I will pick up on, bearing in mind the question was asked of the rail operator, is the situation with regard to how we're making travel safer at the moment. Like all companies, we've had to do COVID-19 risk assessments, which have to be available to the public, and you'll find those on our website. But more importantly than that, it's all about actually doing things in particular. David mentioned about reduced capacity on vehicles. What we've also been doing is completely transforming our cleaning regime. So, historically, bus operators would clean the buses at night when they're rolled in off service, and they would sit there ready for the following morning. What we now do here in Yellow Buses is our cleaning team start at 4 o'clock in the morning, and every vehicle goes through a much enhanced clean before it rolls out on the road that morning. We also have fogging machines which are used on vehicles, particularly at the weekends when there's more time to do that. Every bus is fitted with hand sanitizer, and it's probably also worth just talking about what appears to be a very emotive subject, which is face coverings. Unfortunately, there have been a number of incidents involving staff of both operators where drivers have been both verbally, and in the case of one more bus driver, physically assaulted for trying to determine from people whether they should be wearing a face covering or not. There are 13 different exemptions which are available to people, and these range from children under 11 don't have to wear them, but also people with disabilities. And of course, we've also had a number of passengers arguing with other passengers on buses. What I would say really, and particularly to the councillors on the call, no doubt you will get those kind of complaints through your in-trays, but just please remember that not all disabilities are obvious, and it's hard sometimes to challenge people. For example, one of the reasons that can be given for not wearing a face covering is that the person needs to be able to lip read. It's very often said, why don't your drivers wear face coverings, because they are contributing to the issue. In the case of our drivers on yellow buses, they are all behind protective screens, so there is no requirement for them to wear face coverings. Some do, which is their choice. But then, of course, if we have people who are hard of hearing or want to ask a question, they need to be able to see the lips of the driver. It's unfortunate that one of the kind of negatives that's come out of COVID is actually people's intolerance towards other people. So I'll just ask everyone to remember that. Like David, we are ramping up services from next week. We've got the return of the schools. Nobody quite knows how that's going to go, whether parents are going to keep their kids at home despite the government messaging, or whether they will take them by car. I think probably one of the most unfortunate things about this, which David alluded to, was the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, was very quick to say all those weeks ago, it is your civic duty not to use public transport. That message has never been rescinded. Boris Johnson, the PM, said about a month ago, you may use public transport from tonight, but don't if you don't need to. So it's a very wishy-washy message. And unfortunately, there is a potential for long-term damage in that, in that we really need to get back to what we had before this, which was actually some growth. It's not too long ago that BCP was being hailed as one of the few local authorities in England that actually had bus passenger growth, whereas the rest of the country is going backwards. And hopefully this is just stalled at the moment, and particularly with the benefit of TCF coming through, but actually we should be able to get back into those periods of growth. Rather than repeating the kind of things that David said, I'll probably leave it there and invite questions.
Thank you very much, David. And David is going to make questioning very interesting, but no, very interesting stuff so far. I've got a couple of speakers lined up, colleagues wishing to ask questions. I'll go first to Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. It's not directly related to the COVID-19 recovery issues for transport, but I thought whilst we have the opportunity with the representatives of the bus companies, if I could just ask, if I could ask both the Davids, are the companies looking at alternative types of buses? I mean, those of us that are old enough will remember the trolley buses in Bournemouth, of course, electric buses. So, is any consideration being given to sort of electric buses or alternative power sources for the buses that you use?
Thank you. Shall I go to David Leekong first?
Yeah, the technology in that field has been developing quite significantly in the last sort of decade or so, and through some funding available through Wiltshire Council and the government, we actually operate 3 electric single-deck buses in Salisbury on our park and ride surface there, and that's giving us a unique insight into the operation of that and how we can facilitate that elsewhere. Of course, the key thing with electric vehicles is all about range and how far it can go and can it do a day's work, and also how what the charging mechanism is like. There are parts of the country where there's what's called opportunity charging, where the bus will charge throughout the day at bus stops and things, but that obviously takes a lot more infrastructure. The preferred method for ourselves would be to go to a depot charging overnight. The government, prior to all the COVID things, you'll recall that the government announced funding for an electric bus town, and we've got a few bids in with that, and we look to see where that takes us. But as I say, from our perspective at the moment, COVID has obviously put things back, because the funding that we would have had in terms of our own expenditure at the moment, we're just trying to maintain having a business and keeping the services going. So it's certainly one that I think, whilst it may not be as relevant right now today, certainly for the future, and as transport and bus services develop, certainly that's something that will become more and more important.
Thank you, David. David Squire?
Yes, I agree with everything David has said. I mean, one of the peculiar sort of parts of the funding process which we are in at the moment is that companies are not allowed to make a profit. So therefore, obviously in normal times you use your profits to invest for the future. And David's actually right on everything he said. So I've nothing to add to that. It's quite true.
Thank you very much. Councillor Farquhar has a question. Councillor Farquhar?
Thank you very much. I guess this question is for both of you, because you've talked about the risk and the actions that you've taken to keep your members of staff safe, particularly the bus drivers. This is the reality of the situation that in London, where our public transport workers are mainly of, or a large percentage from the BAME community, is that there are certain employees that are at more risk from COVID. So my question is this: what further measures are you taking to ensure the safety of your staff, particularly based around the fact that you give the feedback that we have, I think the word used was a controversial subject of face coverings, and residents or passengers in this particular case questioning other passengers? What is it that the bus companies can do to set a very clear message that supports the drivers in the very difficult job that they do on the front line, particularly when they're at risk? And I appreciate that they're behind shields and they don't need to wear coverings, etc. But these are human beings with families, and the same as the nurses, people are at fear that they're going to be infected when going about their daily work. So my question to you, is the bus companies doing enough to make sure that the protection of both the physical health of your employees, either from attack or abuse, but also the mental health from fear of infection for people that are not wearing face coverings?
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. I'll go to David Squire first this time. Councillor David.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of it's a very varied answer to what the councillor has asked. First of all, I'll go back to the risk assessments. They are very important. Every business has to do them. I'm sure the council has to do them as well for its own employees. But it's also very important that the employees are part of that process. And that's certainly something that we practice within this business, that they're very much part of this. And of course, we are a unionised environment, so, as you would expect. We also have mental health professionals who our drivers have access to. We've invested a lot in making sure that that's available. Of course, in the early days of this, where a lot of staff will be becoming furloughed by the very nature of the way the business had gone, we were very keen to ensure that anybody who had any particular health issues was part of the batch of staff who went through that process. I think it's also worth just letting you know that we're probably quite unique in this. So, as you know, we are a locally owned business, so we are a small business. We're not of the size of the Go Ahead Group at all. But we have done some work with government scientists, and they were looking for a bus operator who was prepared to allow them to test our vehicles and to see what the effectiveness of our cleaning regime was. So we invited down the scientists who came from Porton Down, obviously just up the road in Wiltshire. And as I explained earlier on, we changed our cleaning regime, so we very much ensured that all of the touch points on our vehicles and in the cab for the drivers receive a very detailed clean, certainly completely different to what I've seen in the industry over the last sort of 40 odd years. So what they did, they came in and they tested the environments, both in the driver area and the public area of our vehicles. And then they watched and waited whilst the cleaning team did their work, and then they tested them again and took those samples away. I'm pleased to say that they commended us very much on the way our cleaning regime worked, and the results of those tests was that they found no traces of anything at all. So that gives us confidence that actually all the measures that we put in place, which in the end are all industry standard, are actually having the desired effect. So hopefully that answers the question from our point of view.
Thanks, David. David Lee Kong, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've done very similar things, but we've also had a few things that are a bit bespoke to ourselves. David mentioned the risk assessment, and of course, we that risk assessment sort of evolves as time goes on, and in particular, in relation to the BAME community, we worked with the RMT union that represent drivers in our area, and sort of listened to some of the feedback that they were getting from the railways, and we developed a risk assessment which was bespoke for sort of more vulnerable people, higher risk groups, if you like. So it was a BAME community, but also older people and people with underlying health conditions, to see what other measures that we needed to put in place and to make sure that they were confident in coming to work where applicable. Again, we also made sure that those people that were furloughed, that were in the high risk categories, that they weren't in work during the peak of this, and obviously we keep that under review as time goes on. For us, our vehicles, one of the things we prided ourselves about was the fact that our vehicles weren't fitted with the anti-assault screens, because numerically in the BCP area we have very few incidents. That's not to say we don't have any, but we do have very few, and our customers and our colleagues prefer not having that screen. That, of course, has presented a challenge for us, and therefore we had to act very quickly to get a screen in place, which is at the moment a flexible piece of sort of clear plastic, but we are in the process of having bespoke manufactured screens that will be fitted, because clearly I think it's a case that the measures that we're taking are going to be in place for a good period of time, probably towards the end of next year, if not longer. We've almost doubled the amount of resource we provide in terms of cleaning, both in terms of our buses and vehicles, but also in terms of our premises, and across Go South Coast, which is a wider business than just Moorbus. But we've spent just under £1 million on COVID-related or COVID prevention measures, just in terms of equipment and sanitation products. All of our drivers have got a pack of antiviral wipes that they have, and their own supply of hand sanitizer, so that they can make sure their hands are clean throughout the day. And the wipes are primarily used to wipe down the cab of the vehicle when they take over, so that it's as sterilised as we can be. As I say, the other thing we do is liaise closely with the trade union on behalf of the drivers and communicate with the drivers what we're doing, to make sure that they understand the measures that are there for them.
Great, thank you very much to both of you. I've got two more sets of questions, so I'm very conscious of time. So what I'll do is I'll go to both of the members of the board and get their respective questions and feed them back to both of you. So I've got Councillor Trent, followed by Councillor Brooke. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chairman. The question I want to ask is about the long-term future. At the moment, the bus companies almost certainly have to rely entirely on subsidy to survive, especially with only being able to travel with, half a set of passengers. And looking ahead, one of the things which has always held people back who don't have bus passes like I have from using public transport is the fares. Added to that, now you have got the government's been chucking out some very negative comments about travelling on public transport, and I agree that that's going to take a long time to overcome. But when things are back to normal, or semi-normal, because I don't think it's going to be normal for years now, how is the costs going to be covered? Is there going to be any longer term government support? And is making fares even harder on people's pockets? Is there a danger of that happening? Because your income's going to have dropped and you've got to pay for it some way. So unless there's some kind of subsidy in place, I'm just wondering where you're kind of going in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. And I'll take Councillor Brooks' question as well, and then I can feed them to the Davids. So, Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Very, very quickly, it's two questions. I'll keep them as short as I can. Over the last few years, we've seen the bus services contract significantly, focusing primarily on profitable routes in the town centres and one or two of the slightly busier subsidised routes. Isn't this now a time where we're focusing very much on more active travel and modal shifts in travel to actually revisit the routes that are more marginal? I'm thinking in terms of in some of the rural areas like north of Christchurch and north of Poole, where we're going to be seeing large estates being built that will be totally dependent on the car because the bus services aren't there. So that's the first question. Is this now the time to rethink how bus services operate, especially when we don't want to see 3 or 4 buses, one after the other, queuing up to a bus stop on the M1 route, for instance, and none of them actually full? The second question is related to any ideas about interchangeable tickets between the two bus services. For instance, a £2 ticket that would enable the buses and the passengers to travel from one bus company to another and perhaps extend out into Zone 2 rather than being confined to a single bus within Zone 1. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Councillor Brooke, Councillor Trent, for those questions. Hope you've got those, but I'll pass over I'll go to David Squire first to hopefully address a few of those issues. Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, obviously, some of those questions are completely beyond the gift of people here, because we're dealing with national policy in terms of the way bus services are run and have been since deregulation in England outside of London way back in 1986, which seems a lifetime ago now. I think it's probably important to note that actually, whilst the funding is in place from the DFT, there can be no increases in fares, because that is one of the strict conditions of the funding which we are receiving. But of course, as one of the councillors previously said, what happens when that funding runs out? Clearly that is a concern for us as a business, as for all bus operators in England. And what we want to see is some tailored funding that as revenue increases and the gap gets smaller, that funding is still there. It's probably worth saying that in this area, being a more holiday-based area, but generally you would expect to see greater numbers travelling in the summer, which would keep you going through the winter. Whereas in, say, a city region like, say, Birmingham, it would be the opposite way round, that there wouldn't be the passengers there in the summer and they come back in the winter with schools, colleges, universities and work. So therefore, this kind of one-size-fits-all approach, which the government is currently doing, I don't think is sustainable going forwards. Our lobby group, which is the CPT, which all the main bus operators are members of, has been negotiating the finer detail of the current tranche of funding directly with government, and they're certainly making a lot of points like I've just said. In terms of the areas which are potentially coming on stream for new housing developments, they're not being forgotten about. I think it's important to say that as operators, we're always looking at developments in our network, and certainly in our case, we've been very successful in running some services to outlying areas and increasing patronage on those before COVID derailed that. Another probable example really is actually where there is funding for big housing schemes. That one of the things that comes through there is what's often called Section 106 development money, which is where, in order to give that planning permission for, say, a new estate, there's some money that's put into various travel things, but often that can be used to kickstart a new bus service to cover that estate. And I've certainly worked in towns in the past where that has been very much to the forefront, that buses have been running around almost as when the road network has been sorted out for new estates, so that actually as people move into the houses, they can see there is a bus service there. Obviously that costs money, and it needs to be met in those particular cases by the developers. I think the final question was to do with inter-availability of ticketing. So there is a project which has kind of been a little bit derailed by COVID, which is with both of the bus operators and BCP to develop a smart card system via the phone, where people will be able to travel on both operators, and that is kind of ticking along in the background, and hopefully at some stage we can get that trial started and rolled out, because we do recognise that there are people who want to travel by both operators, but also, of course, there are a lot of people who only have one operator in a particular area. So I'll hand over to David really to cover any points that I've missed out of that.
I mean, I agree with all the points that you've raised, and I think you've covered most of the key issues off there, David. So thank you for answering that from my perspective. I think, just in terms of that subsidy we're getting, our aim is that the amount of money we get decreases on a weekly and monthly basis. And I think I speak for most operators in saying that, we don't want a penny more subsidy than we need. What we want to do is try and get back to a position where we're self-sufficient as we were beforehand. But clearly there are going to be some other trends that have got to be overcome, and that may mean that we need to review what the bus network looks like and the frequencies and so on at some point. But that's not where we are at the moment. What our aim is, every other operator is getting people back to using buses and giving them the confidence to do so, such that any changes need to be minimal. In terms of the other services where that demand has sort of dropped and the more rural services and things, I think, a more nuanced approach, as David was saying, whereby there is some sort of kickstart funding or something to try and drive and reinvigorate some of these routes, if that was desirable to do so, is what would be needed to try and get that off the ground, I think, because clearly once you've lost a bus passenger and once people have changed their habits, it's very difficult to do so. We run the frequency and we run the level of service where we do, where that demand more than covers the cost, or pre-COVID it more than covered the cost to do so, and you get more and more people are attracted by the more frequent services.
Yeah, can I just also add, of course, that the other unknown in all of this is the fallout from COVID in terms of the threat to the economy and to people's jobs. We're already seeing a change in high street, and clearly less people employed, which affects the number of people who travel by bus, but B, if there's less stores for people to go to, that also affects the number of people who travel by bus, and of course how many people are going to continue to work from home for the foreseeable future. I think we've already mentioned with the mixed messaging coming out of government, and certainly anything that BCP can do as an authority to try and put out a more positive message would be more than welcomed. I think this kind of one size fits all from the message from the government is starting to break down now, but they're obviously talking about local lockdowns in areas where there is still a COVID issue. And I think seeing that sort of subtle change in messaging, we'd really like to see change in messaging in terms of this avoid public transport at all cost message being turned off, and perhaps a more positive message being put, because we are doing an awful lot between the two bus operators represented here to try and restore confidence, but we can't do it ourselves when we've got these messages publicised by government, and unfortunately the media is very much on the back of those messages, and pointing to what's going on in London, but what happens in London is not happening in Bournemouth.
Great, thank you very much. I'll avoid the quip about waiting for representatives from bus companies and then two coming across at once, because that would be poor form, wouldn't it? But no, thank you very much to David Squire and David Lee Kong with the information on how your industry is coping, and I think there were some good questions in there, and we've certainly learnt a lot. So thank you very much to yourselves and also to the previous colleagues that joined us. I think we've had a good introduction, I suppose, into the post-COVID, the COVID-19 recovery on those particular industries in transport and infrastructure. We'll now move on to item number 7. But before we do that, I've had a request for a few-minute break. So if we just have a couple of minutes break and then join again, colleagues, stay on the call, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. For those joining us on YouTube, you'll see a holding screen while we have a short recess between these two agenda items. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and welcome back to the first of two Aversion Scrutiny Board meetings today at 2 p.m. Apologies for the short delay there, but these are long meetings, and it's always good to have a comfort break in the middle of them. So we'll now move on to what was item 7 is now item 8, which is the scrutiny of transport and infrastructure-related cabinet reports, and we have Councillor Andy Hadley, who's portfolio holder for transport and infrastructure, to give us an introduction on the Emergency Active Travel Fund programme. However, we have had a number of statements, and I think 35 statements and a petition on this item. A number of people had requested to address the meeting directly, but due to a number of reasons, I think we're down to just one that we actually have on the call. So I do have John Challoner, who joins us on the meeting, that wishes to address the meeting with his statement on this issue. We'll hear that. Colleagues of the board will have seen the other statements and petition relating to this issue as well, and then we can go to the cabinet member for the introduction. So I'll call on Mr. Challoner first to read out your statement. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Is that working?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
Okay, very good. As I said, thank you, Chair. I had submitted a statement on behalf of the Parkstone Bay Association, which is in your appendix, and I welcome the opportunity to expand on this very slightly. We haven't seen this scheme actually implemented yet, even though it was due to start on the 19th of August, so it's a bit hard to judge as to how it's really going to look and the impact it's going to have. Although, like many people, we're concerned that there hadn't been prior consultation where some other schemes had, with regards to residents and businesses having a chance to put their feedback in. Of the people that I've had communication with and spoken to, very few are in favour of this particular route becoming cycling and pedestrian only. And I'm really not sure there's likely to be that large an increase in the walkers and cyclists using this particular bridge. It's already used by those who want to use that route. And there's also the underpass at the beta end of the lake, which is for walkers and cyclists only as well. So I'm not sure it's going to drive more people to use this particular route. But what it will do is just push the traffic that would use Whitecliffe Road into Twemlow and Orchard Avenue, which I think is going to be a bit of an issue for people living there, and also for the drivers that want to then exit onto Sandbanks Road, given the poor visibility at that junction looking one way. Did consider, and one or two people have suggested that would a traffic light scheme have been better in this location to keep the route open to all those that want to use it, to enable the social distancing that's been suggested will be achieved by this scheme, as well as slowing down the traffic flow. And finally, I think that we as an association would prefer to see a more holistic approach to schemes in the area that we've been requesting for some time, looking at the issues around on-road parking, the speed limits, double yellow lines in different places, and the use of a cycle route as well. As part of a wider consultation, which we'd rather see prior to implementation, that's something that we would certainly have approved of more readily. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Challoner, and thank you for that statement. Colleagues, we will now move on to the Cabinet member to give us an introduction on this item, which we are scrutinising, which will be coming forward at the next Cabinet meeting, which from memory is on the 9th of September. We'll have all obviously read the item, so a brief introduction from the Cabinet member, and then we'll go into the discussion. So thank you very much for joining us, Councillor Hadley, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I need to start with context, and I think it's been helpful to have the discussion we just had with the bus operators and with the Active Travel Forum and the train operators, because that's at the heart of why the government decided to implement these schemes. I think there's been some quite misleading things said about me and the Unity Alliance in the press and social media, which just distort the dialogue, and it's really important that we serve the public with great care in the crisis. The COVID crisis is by no means over. After the First World War, it was the second wave of pandemics that killed more people than in the trenches in the war. There are still signs that we are nationally and locally approaching the second wave, although numbers are fortunately low at the moment. I'm not pro-bike and anti-car, and nor is this administration. We need a healthy range of transport choices, but the role of local government and councils is not just to respond to or to whip up public pressure. We have to create the best future we can for our children and beyond. The car has been a strong force for enabling people to enrich their lives over the last 50 years, but it does have significant health, environmental and space sharing impacts on users and everybody else, and these have been increasing incrementally. I am anti-pollution, the impact on human health and on the environment. I am anti-injury accidents, especially those involving children, life-changing injuries whilst even on the pavement when hit by out-of-control vehicles. I am anti-congestion. We do not, in the urban area, have space to absorb an ever-growing number of vehicles and trips, journeys, particularly the short journeys. And I am against the social isolation and limited freedoms that 1/4 of our population with no access to a car in the household endure. We need to face up to these realities and to work together to improve our towns. The COVID pandemic and especially lockdown put into sharp relief quite how dominating the use of the car is in our shared space. It was a brief respite when you could walk or cycle in relative safety, when air was clean and birdsong rather than traffic noise dominated. And it provided a warning, a pointer and a glimpse that whether COVID-19 recovery, post-Brexit or combating climate change, nature has a capacity to heal if we give it a chance and we grasp the future together. The Emergency Active Travel Fund is a very small step on that journey, and the Conservative government set out the parameters which required us to take urgent action and to limit the advance consultation that we could undertake. It's always difficult to change, and we could have passed up the opportunity, but it's a journey that urban communities around the world are taking for the health, wealth and survival of their populations. The measures will be imperfect and initially create disruption. Our officers have worked diligently and at great pace to undertake this work, which displace their existing priorities. I hope we can work constructively together to support this important work. And in terms of the paper, there are two recommendations here. One is to note the progress to date regarding the delivery of the Tranche 1 emergency programme, and the second is to note the bid that we've placed. We haven't yet heard how successful we're going to be for the active travel Tranche 2 measures. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. A couple of colleagues straight in. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of people know that I haven't been a fan of all the schemes being put forward, the myth was perpetuated basically with the public speaker John Challoner spoke. This is a government scheme. Unfortunately, I think it's one of the typically clumsy, ham-fisted government schemes. And it was basically, you do this, but you've got 4 weeks to do it. And I suspect that hidden beneath it all is if you don't spend the money on this, we won't give you the money for a more planned long-term thing. Personally, I favour, apart from things like, for example, making space available for queuing outside Waitrose in Ashley Road. You had to do that, and in other places where you've got narrow pavement, so you had to take emergency action to do that. But personally, I think these schemes shouldn't have been given to us by government and the funding in a way that means things have got to be rushed through. I personally feel that if you don't take your time to go through these things properly, there's a danger of unintended consequences. But the problem is, we are where we are, and but I do think that if people don't like the way that the current system functions, then it needs to be their MPs that they speak to, the people who can influence the minister and the prime minister and the government and so on, because this is, unfortunately, it's one of their clumsy schemes. We seem to have a government of muppets that seem to sort of make up something off the cuff. I think they wake up in one morning and say, oh yeah, we've got to do this today, and don't think it through. And everything that's happened, and particularly over recent weeks, just illustrates that is the problem. But what I do think we need to do is, when these schemes are introduced, that we make it perfectly clear that there is a 6-month period after which we review it. And I think that it needs to, perhaps over that first 6 months, maybe when it's bedded in for a while, it needs to go to something like a revived transport advisory group where people can actually look at it, pull it apart and say, well, what are the alternatives? Is this working? What would work better? Rather than have the situation now where it's been turned into a political football, where it's one group blames the other group for doing it. Nobody mentions the people who actually set up the scheme. And quite frankly, we're going to have problems on this. God knows what's going to happen when the new permitted development and the new fast track planning things come into force, because that is going to be an absolute diabolical disaster. So, as I say, we really need to find a better way of managing this, and maybe part of it is to make it very, very clear from the word go that it's a temporary scheme that is subject to review down the road.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trent. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo a fair amount of Councillor Trent's concerns and certainly analysis of the nature of the scheme. I've got two items, if I may. The first one is the purpose of scrutiny is to look at risk. I think for the presentations and in fact the Mr. Chandler coming, is that the risk that we have here is twofold. The first one is that because of the nature of the way that the emergency travel, active travel scheme funding is put together, is that to actually respond and secure tranche 2 of the funding to make things a reality, we need empirical evidence. Without that empirical evidence, then the scheme is quite clear in that we will not get the funding to make the changes, even though they may be beneficial. The risk here is already been faced in that a variety of these experimental point closures has been communicated in such a way that residents and members of the public have picked up the wrong end of the stick. Not just here in BCP, but right across the country, because there are movements to block all ETROs. I've seen leaflets in other parts of the country whereby it's, for want of a better term, opposing something which they don't understand. So the risk is that we are not communicating as a local authority that it is experimental, it is for a period of time, and it would only come into place based upon a full consultation and empirical evidence, but you cannot gain that empirical evidence to do the funding without actually having the scheme in place. So that's the first thing, point which I'd like to make, and what we as a scrutiny panel can make as a recommendation to Cabinet to ensure that future ETROs and point closures, etc., in support of what is the emergency active travel scheme funding is dealt with. The second point is that I think this is the right point, because the paper is very comprehensive. It does lay out the nature of the scheme, the nature of the consultation, why it is that it's changed, but we're not communicating with the public because, for instance, in this scrutiny panel itself, we only have 21 viewers on YouTube. So this is part of the risk. So I think this is the right point to actually, my proposal earlier was to thank the officers for the amount of work that they've put in, based upon the over 1,000 pieces of suggestion which they ranked in order for their viability and how they matched the criteria that the government put in place. And I think it's important to thank those officers, because that resulted in an uplift for phase 1. So that we could try these experimental things based upon the feedback that we had from our residents. Nobody just dreamed it up to say, oh, we'll close that. It was actually from our growth and infrastructure and our our transport officers that put this together based upon the criteria and based upon the feedback that our residents wanted. So I would like to propose that the Overview and Scrutiny Board does make a note of thanks for the work that the growth and infrastructure and the transport officers put together in securing us not only tranche 1 and an uplift to tranche 1, but also having the foresight based upon that uplift to actually put in a higher bid for tranche 2. But The risk, as I said, is that we will not get Tranche 2 funding without evidence, and we will not get evidence if we as an authority allow these schemes to be blocked by popular opinion without giving them an opportunity to see. So that's what I'd like to propose, is that we have a note of thanks for our infrastructure and transport officers, our growth and infrastructure and transport officers that put together the proposals and the successful submissions to government.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farquhar. And indeed, it's been a theme of all of these COVID-related scrutinies that we understand there's a lot of hard work going behind the scenes, and I don't think we ever miss an opportunity to thank those that are working hard on our behalf. Is that it's pretty unusual for us to make a formal recommendation thanking? It's something we normally do. Are you intending to make that as a formal proposal, or are you just insisting that we, as normal, thank officers?
That's the two parts, as I said. The thanking of the officers, I think it's important that officers get the recognition that the papers that they present for scrutiny and the successful papers that have secured these bids is very. My recommendation was that the board would actually discuss the risk that we have by actually the nature of, we will not secure that second tranche of funding without some of these schemes coming into effect so that we can actually get empirical evidence. So my recommendation would be, from discussion, that we look at the communication plan to residents of how these schemes are in place and what they're supposed to achieve, because what's come through time and time again is that residents are not picking that up. So it's a two-part thing. First one, I would like to have a note of thanks from the ONS for our officers, and perhaps in the debate a recommendation may come from there.
Thank you very much. And I've had a message from our clerk Bob, who said that he will set that out in the minutes in that form. So thank you very much for your input. I'll now move on to the next person requesting to speak, who is Councillor Mike Green. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman, and I look forward to seeing the recommendation from Councillor Farquhar so that we can discuss that second part of it, if it's going to be a recommendation from Scrutiny. I've really got to take issue with Councillor Hadley, I'm afraid. Started off by saying he's not anti-car, and then pretty much every other word that came from then was entirely anti-car. I'm actually very proud of what this Conservative government has done. I think it was absolutely right that they should bring forward the proposals and the opportunity to local councils in the way that they've done. And I would not personally be asking Councillor Hadley or the leadership to have turned it down. There is an opportunity, and I'm very glad that the council has taken that chance. But I would ask that we recognise that it could have and should have been done an awful lot better. I think what Councillor Trent was saying shows that a lot of people have bought into the idea that there was no chance for communication, for consultation with ward councillors and cascaded down to residents in particular and businesses too. I don't buy that in any way at all. There was a better way of doing it, and that should have been taken. We heard earlier from Mr. Faulkner that that his forum had been active in this and spoken to about it some 20 weeks ago. We knew in advance, the council would have known in advance, that on around the 27th of May or something like that, they would have been asked to submit schemes. We know that those schemes were submitted to government on the 5th of June, or by the 5th of June. And having sat in Councillor Hadley's position, at least in the Bournemouth element of it, for a number of years, I would have known, I am sure, that it was likely that many of those schemes would have been given the go-ahead. If not to have done that would have been extremely naive, and I wouldn't accuse Councillor Hadley or the senior officers of being naive about this. So it was known that these would likely go forward or would likely get approval. By the 25th of June, according to Councillor Hadley, we actually had, as BCP, approval for all of these and the funding from them. And yet, even ward councillors were not given that information until, or certainly in the case of the Eastcliff, until I think it was the 24th of July. In some of the cases, it hasn't been until August. There are many, many weeks that have gone forward. I would go a little bit further and say that we actually were, hesitant to use the word, but I'll do it for want of a better one, we were misled at the last meeting about the proposals for the Eastcliff. And that, in a meeting for Aversion Scrutiny, for me, is unforgivable. There was the opportunity for ward councillors to be involved. If they had been involved and they had been allowed to share that information with their residents, we would have come up with better plans. This was just not done right, and I feel absolutely furious about it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. I think it follows on very nicely from some of the things that Councillor Mike Green has actually just spoken about. I was going to touch on the timescale, but Councillor Mike Green's already covered that quite adequately. But what I would want to add to that is the fact that given the timescale, there was opportunity to actually inform ward councillors at an earlier opportunity, which for whatever reason didn't really happen. And speaking from my experience as a ward councillor, I've got my ward councillor hat on now. For the scheme on Evening Hill, myself and Councillor Iyengar were asked for comments. And then when I eventually shared information with residents, because I felt that in order to be able to get a better evidence-based feedback, it would be useful to actually seek the views from some of my residents. I was actually told, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't share that information with residents because it's just for your information as a ward councillor. And frankly, I was quite shocked when I saw that, because I thought, well, how am I meant to, not just myself, any councillor, be able to represent their residents properly if they're not allowed to even have that sort of dialogue with them, particularly with schemes which you think, oh, some people will be happy, but there will be some people that will not be happy. So let's go and seek some feedback. But I was told, well, you shouldn't have done that. And I think this really strikes the chord where Mr. Challoner talked about the scheme for Whitecliff, the closing of Keyhole Bridge. I think the key there is the fact that, again, it was lack of consultation. And then coming back to some of the statements, the many statements that were submitted, I think the one that really strikes a chord with me is a submission from a Mrs. Morgan, who has a disabled husband and a disabled father, who have, up until very recently, been able to enjoy the view at Evening Hill. They used to drive up there, they used to park up, and then because her husband has a certain medical condition, it's just about able to do the short walk from the car to the benches on Evening Hill and sit there and enjoy the view. They're now no longer able to do that, and she feels that she has actually been marginalised, that yes, while she understands that there's a need to encourage more green modes of transport, but then it needs to be done in a balanced way so that all groups are listened to and given consideration. She feels, and I do tend to agree with her, that perhaps in this instance, that priority was given to one group over other groups that also use the area. So, you know, I just think that the consultation or the lack of consultation is really what's made a lot of people very, very upset. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, if he's able to give me the question, I would please like to ask a couple of questions of Councillor Hadley before making a comment, if that's all right. Are you and he happy?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Councillor Hadley, not to drill down into the detail of every one of these proposals, but given that some of them are near schools, I wonder if you could tell me what consultation actually took place with Bethany and St Clement's and St John's schools, and with Moordown St John's School, and also from an equalities impact, what consultation took place with the Bournemouth Blind Society in advance of the Victoria Road and the Cleveland Road schemes being put forward.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to respond obviously to the previous points as well. The officers have been following the path as laid out in this, and one of their concerns was, given the speed with which they needed to do it, they needed to enact the schemes. I don't have the answer in terms of the discussions they've had with the schools. It was something that certainly in terms of ward councillors, I have asked repeatedly through the process to engage the ward councillors at an early point in the process. But they were very keen that that information wasn't shared with the public before they got to the final scheme to be shared, because otherwise it raises unexpected outcomes, things like pedestrianisation of the Eastcliff. It was never a pedestrianisation, it was point closure, and that was the point that was made at the last ONS committee meeting. It was not a pedestrianisation of particularly the western end of that road. But in terms of your two questions, I'm sorry, I need to ask the officers to help me with that.
Councillor Green? If there is an officer who's able to give us the answer, I think it might be helpful.
I'll wait for an indication. If any officers do have that information, if they can indicate in the message bar request to speak, and we'll pass over to you. Richard Pincroft.
Hi, good afternoon. In terms of consultation and engagement with schools, unfortunately, obviously due to the timing of the application process with government during effectively the summer recess, we've not directly engaged with the schools around those areas. The proposals that have been put in have been based on obviously the criteria that are set out in the report, which are obviously propensity to cycle, proximity to schools, impacts on road safety, etc., etc. So they're really based on the government criteria. We've only had 7 days to go from zero to a bid to put it in. And obviously everything that's gone in is experimental. It's a trial. So if retrospectively we find that something isn't, liked or wanted, or it isn't positive, or maybe it will be positive, until we try, we won't know. And obviously the purpose of this is that it's experimental in nature. The reason that the consultation period is very short and it's an experimental traffic regulation order process that's been used is because the government criteria stipulated that we had to have effectively started implementing the proposals within 4 weeks. So if we were to follow a traditional traffic regulation order process and do traditional consultation with interested parties, we would have timed out and effectively been unable to deliver any of the measures. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Richard. I'll return to you, Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. It does answer the question, but really not the answer that I was hoping for, I'm afraid. If I may go back to the report, we've heard, as Mr Pincroft said, that in paragraph 9, the schemes were shortlisted because they ranked highest when scored using the following criteria: impact on walking and cycling to school. That's impact. That's not somebody's idea. That's impact. And what we have is no consultation with those schools. There are 3 schools who are in the immediate vicinity. I know from a colleague in Wallaston and Winton West that the school wasn't approached. There is every chance that those head teachers will know about the impact this is having on children travelling to school is when they go back at the end of what has been one of the most challenging period for any child and any family. And there's not even been the courtesy of contact with those bodies. I've heard nothing about Bournemouth Blind Society, which is faces onto Victoria Park Road, who cannot get their residents safely there except by transport. This is it's a deeply unsatisfying report and approach to the questions. And just I think in terms of trying to put my thoughts together, I do need to say that I am a new and enthusiastic cyclist. I am one of those people who Mr. Faulkner was talking about earlier on, who've taken this dreadful period as an opportunity to look at myself and say, actually, I should probably do some more exercise. And there are huge benefits to it. I am absolutely loving it. And every time I go out, I am truly grateful to the councils who have come before for the safe routes that there are, and it's my responsibility to use them safely, and to try and find my way around. They've given me a great deal of encouragement, and I am absolutely not anti-bike. I am not anti-safety schemes. However, I've been a ward councillor for a lot longer than I've been a cyclist, and where the difficulties have come, it seems to me, is by a failure to engage with the public, and especially through their ward councillors. Our residents, sadly, and I do accept that some of these schemes will be very successful. This is not, I really don't want to be picking through everyone, but there is a genuine problem with the approach which has been taken, in that our residents have been ignored and sidelined and subsequently patronised, frankly. The press releases which have come out rather ungraciously have simply doubled down on the original proposal, and suggesting, as indeed Councillor Farquhar has in this meeting, that residents have got concerns because they don't understand what's going on. Actually, they perfectly well understand, but they have not been properly consulted. So yes, words like pedestrianisation are used, but actually what people are concerned about is that they can no longer drive from one end of the road to the other. Now, that may not suit the cycling agenda, but that is what people were expecting. And when words like modal filters are used, people know the wool is being pulled over their eyes. This is not plain English. And I think it's the council actually who didn't understand that residents' concerns have been, exactly about the change. People do resist change, and we must help people to understand fully through comprehensive communication. But that is not what's happened in this case, and it is no surprise that people are deeply, deeply unhappy. And I think the failure to even make contact with schools who are going to be impacted on this is an absolutely terrible indictment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Nicola Green. Councillor Stephen Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Given the largely negative feedback that's come from the public on these schemes, wouldn't it be better to use the 400k contribution towards the schemes to spend it on safety improvements that have already been identified across the conurbation? And I can tell you that in my ward, I've been waiting for over 2 years for TROs to be implemented, which were constituted for safety reasons, still not implemented. Regarding the schemes, I wouldn't wish to comment on the technical benefits of any of them because I don't know them well enough, but I do get the feeling that officers working on these schemes are not fully supportive of what's actually been proposed, and I get the feeling that it's all being driven effectively as a result of political doctrine, and it's coming across very strongly. I would say that the public comment is not just about the lack of consultation, whilst it is there and very strong. Primarily, it's about the schemes themselves, which are described as harebrained, and those people that live in those areas have been very, very specific about the way that these schemes will increase congestion, it will make life more difficult, it will increase pollution, etc. And lastly, and I agree entirely with Councillor Nicola Green there, the language that is being used really conceals a lot of it, you know, modal shift and point filters and all the rest of it. Most people, the general public, don't understand what this language is all about. They do understand road closures, they understand planters and things like that. So I really think the language that is being used in the communications is very poor. There's also a huge degree of arrogance about the market, the comms coming out of the council. Yes, we agree your concerns, but we are insistent on doing a scheme anyway. In other words, we haven't listened to what you've said. We're going to go ahead and do something anyway, whether you like it or not. You know, the language is not very good, and it certainly is not doing anything good for the reputation of our council. We really have got to address this in a much more professional way than we have to date.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Earl?
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to clarify, as Andy said, you know, the Emergency Active Travel Fund is from government, and as much as I generally disagree with government policy on many things, the very grounding for this policy is actually to decrease the public's dependence on cars, both for environmental purposes and for the population's health, by taking advantage of the fact we've all been working from home, we're all using our green spaces, our roads, our parks as pedestrians and as cyclists a lot more than we were. So just looking back at tranche 1, and for example Evening Hill, people are predisposed to dislike or even fear these kind of changes, and like Jason Faulkner said from BH Active Travel, he called it loss aversion, but it's because of that the government have extended these powers to local councils to implement these schemes, which are, you know, they are experimental and they're just in place for 6 months until they are reviewed. Evening Hill, as an example, it's showing great user results. The statistics show that it's being used, but we have to give it time to see if it's something that residents want permanently. Whereas as for the Overcliff Drive scheme, we'll never know if it would have worked or not, and I feel like that's a little bit of a loss because it hasn't really been explained how experimental it is and how it's not forever. Anyway, just moving on, there is some conflict here on the level of ward councillor engagement in the tranche 1 schemes. So I think what I'm going to do is to move this along is submit a motion to spell it out so that the public and us as members and officers and decision makers are all really clear on who should have been and who has been involved in bringing plans forward, so that we're really getting the best for our residents. So as a simple motion, can we amend the second recommendation to include the words "and ward councillors for the ward in which the scheme is proposed" onto that second recommendation? I'll just put that into the bar. Just to talk a little bit more on that, I hear what Councillor Haynes is saying, but I just wanted to raise that we are part of representative democracy where councillors are elected to represent residents to the best of our ability, not direct democracy where we ask residents on everything what we should do. We have a duty as councillors to take action on behalf of residents in circumstances, and because the Emergency Active Travel Fund has been turned into such a political football, it means that we need to treat the plans in a sensitive way and approach them rationally rather than contribute to sparking such a negative emotional response. So, you know, maybe as councillors we need to learn from this as well about how we actually engage with this so that our residents are represented on these issues. But on the motion though, I think the amendment to the recommendation would just formalise that ward councillors are consulted and that they have been given the opportunity to represent their residents in the first instance. I think that's about it, so I'd appreciate if anyone else would like to second that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Earl, and thank you for sharing that recommended wording in the bar. I've got Councillor Farquhar that has just said that he would like to second. Any comments on this recommendation for an amended recommendation onto the Cabinet report? Councillor Haynes?
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't specifically going to speak to the recommendation from Councillor Earl, but I did want to come back on one of the comments that she made when she referred to the statement that Mr. Faulkner made, which was a change aversion. I think that that would actually be, in a way, slightly insulting to our residents, because it can imply that they don't know any better, so therefore we, the council, will have to make that decision for them because they cannot see the benefits, but we can, so we have made that decision for them. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. I think Councillor Farquhar wanted to speak to the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do support the recommendation by Councillor Earl. The reason I support that is, for instance, in the case of the Overcliff, the predominance, the lion's share, 99% of it covers the southern boundary of my ward, and just either end the two adjoining wards. So I think it is important that all ward councillors, even if it's the smallest part of any recommendation for an ETRO, are consulted. In this particular case, I think it's important to recognise that I was consulted with privileged information, so that I could offer up the views in the same way that other councillors here have from their residents and their feel from actually living in the ward. Not all councillors live in the ward, but I know that they will certainly have a grasp of how residents actually react to proposals and so on and so forth of this particular nature. I chose not to reply to that particular privileged information that came out in the form of an email to all 6 councillors across the 3 wards, because from what I could see and why it is that I've made the recommendation that we thank the officers, and I'd just like to thank Richard Pincroft for his answer there, whereby it was from 7 days from 0 to a bid. I'd like to reinforce my thanks by saying actually that's from that officer perspective, that's 7 days from 0 to hero, not 0 to a bid. 7 days from 0 to hero to actually get that down and get the money secured for tranche 1 and for tranche 2, so that it's a viable scheme. I also support this scheme because, as Councillor Earl said, it's a shame. We will never know, because there's been such a strength of feeling for residents who haven't grasped the nature of it. And again, it comes back to the risks that I talked about, in that we have a responsibility, not just this local authority, but all local authorities, because all local authorities, to a greater or lesser degree, are facing the exact same discussions in their scrutiny boards as we are today, because there is a great deal of resistance because we haven't been able to communicate what it is that it's going to. So I've had residents say that yes, it's pedestrianisation of the Overcliff. Yes, it's exactly the same as what happened to the East Cliff. Oh, we turned that one back. I need to be able to get to my house. I need to get to my house. So therefore, to Councillor Nicola Green's point, is that we have a responsibility to communicate better. But I support the recommendation, and I just wanted to highlight that I and the other councillors in the scheme that has actually been paused, missed out an opportunity to gather that empirical evidence because it wasn't communicated well enough, perhaps by me, perhaps by the other councillors, perhaps by the communication plan by the council. I don't know. But the end result is that that scheme there is paused, and we'll never know the effect that might have had on children travelling to school. I've got schools in my ward as well, and I've had a lot of parents approach me that they would be keen to do active travel, walking and using cycling if they felt safe. And we will never know. So I support the recommendation on those points.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think I may need some help. We may need some help from Democratic Services, because while there's nothing to disagree with in Councillor Milliel's amendment to the suggested amendment to the cabinet recommendation, I feel it doesn't go nearly far enough. It is forward-looking, and she's quite right that we should be looking forward to how to do it better next time. But we should also be looking back to what's gone on up until now. I'm still struggling hearing again from Councillor Farquhar that the public haven't grasped the nature of these schemes. I think the public have grasped them perfectly well, and I would like to be to put forward a proposal, but Mr. Hanson may well tell me whether or not this can form part of this. That the Overview and Scrutiny panel expresses its disappointment at the lack of engagement in Tranche 1 with ward councillors who were prevented from onward consultation with their communities. It believes that this democratic deficit significantly increased the concern and the confusion which inevitably followed. So I'd be grateful for how to take that forward, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. Is that that's an amendment to the Councillor Earl's points? Within that amendment, do you wish to keep the second point, which is to add onto recommendation 2 and ward councillors for the ward which scheme is proposed, so that you've got the forward looking and backwards looking?
It's motherhood and apple pie, Chairman, yes, of course. But I can see the points of order, and that's exactly why I've asked for Democratic Services recommendation on how we should move forward with those, whether they should be separate or whether they should be dealt with as the amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Okay. I'll move to Bob to maybe give us some advice. I would have thought if it's a clear amendment to the recommendation that's been put forward, then we deal with the amendment. If it's a new one, then and as Bob, do you want to give us some guidance on this?
Yes.
I'm seeing on the bar that we think it's an amendment to recommendation 1. And recommendation 2. So, Bob, I'll pass it to you.
I was going to say that what Councillor Earl says isn't an amendment. That's because there's no initial motion. It's what Councillor Earl has said is a proposal that your committee says to the cabinet that it should be as 1 and 2 plus the extra bit that Councillor Earl's put in the bar. So that's the proposal, that's the recommendation before your committee. If somebody wants then to make an amendment, maybe along the lines that Councillor Green has suggested, then that would be an amendment to what Councillor Earl has proposed. So you would deal with that as an amendment first, agree it or not, and then go back to the original of what Councillor Earl has proposed. It's not an amendment. Councillor Earl's not making an amendment in a procedural way. She's just because there's no proposal. She's just using the text of the cabinet report to phrase her proposal. Or Chairman, if you want to agree formally that if everyone you could just add both of them on if you want to. If you want to keep it formal, only if you've got an amendment to Councillor Green, then if someone seconds that, you have to deal with that first.
Okay, I'll defer to I'll go back to Councillor Green. Are you wishing for this to be an amendment to what Councillor Earl has put forward? We'll deal with it together, or is it a separate point?
I'm not sure I have much clarity. To be fair, Chairman, I think they are separate points, and therefore would be happy. I can see if Councillor Earl is happy to take them as separate points, then I am too.
Yes, please. I understand the sentiment in yours, Councillor Green, but I would prefer them to be taken separately if possible.
So in that case, Chairman, take the proposal by Councillor Earl and have a vote on it if you want to, and then you're open to any more proposals when that's been dealt with.
Excellent. I mean, that's what we've done before. Obviously, it's always more complicated if it's deemed to be an amendment to a proposal that's been made. But I think we've now established that they're two very related points, but separate points. So we'll continue on Councillor Earl's proposed amendment to the Cabinet paper, which has been duly seconded, and then we can revert to Councillor Nicola Green's suggested proposal once we've dealt with that issue. In which case, do I have any other councillors that wish to speak on Councillor Earle's point? I'm trying to go back. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I do take upset, should we say, with the comment about ward councillors not consulting with our residents. I would very much, on any scheme that affects my residents directly, expect to, as a local councillor, to explain, consult, and tell them what the scheme is. And if they don't understand what a point closure is, or what a keyhole of bridge is, or anything else,
Yeah, it sounds like we may have lost Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I thought that was just me, but Councillor Anderson, we'll try to get your audio back, and we'll come back to you in a moment. I'll move on to Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I actually wanted to speak on the amendment because I would like evidence as to where members have been prevented from speaking to their constituents. I know time is difficult when you've got something that crops up with only a very short response period, but I'm not aware of anything that was put out that prevents members from talking to specific residents. Obviously on a scheme like this, because it's not going to committee and so on, you haven't got time to do a major consultation, but the charge that they are being prevented from consulting with residents worries me, because certainly if I was presented with this and I thought there were one or two people that were going to be concerned about this and might have some questions about it, I would phone them up or email them and ask them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trent. Councillor Mike Green, then Councillor Karen Rampton.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, I'm only speaking on Councillor Earle's recommendation at the moment. And while I go along with the sentiment of it, as Nicola said, it's motherhood and apple pie, there is one point, which is that the applications for tranche 2 will go in some time before they are subsequently approved by government. In fact, that could be quite a long time, and I am not particularly happy that these should all be going on and being effectively worked up on the assumption that they are likely to be going ahead without ward councillor involvement in it. So I would like to see that those schemes that are going into tranche 2 should be shared with the ward councillors at the earliest available opportunity, and not just once they have been approved.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Rampton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. I did have a question for later on, but I'm just going to come in on the amendment because of something that Councillor Trent raised. And Councillor Trent, perhaps I can help you, because I would like to comment on the serious lack of consultation on this scheme. But not only that, the absolutely blatant attempt to gag elected members. And I mean by that the instructions from Councillors Hadley and Slade not to share the details of the scheme, not only with our residents, but actually not even with each other. And Chair, if you will indulge me, I've just got a couple of quotes that I'd just like to share with the committee. So the first one is from an officer, and it says, "I'd ask that the information in this email is kept confidential and not distributed further to avoid confusion." To which I went back and said, "I'm concerned about your request for confidentiality. We have a duty to the residents we represent to keep them fully informed of issues that affect their lives. I then had an email back from Councillor Hadley. Consider this embargoed privileged information rather than confidential. So then I went back again and challenged that. I then had an email from Councillor Vicky Slade. It is appropriate that cascade to residents should be done through the corporate methods, and this is why we have asked that it is not shared with residents. So I am really, really angry and upset that fellow elected members can think that they can actually dictate to us. We are all represented, all elected equally to represent our residents, and nobody has the right, unless there is a certain reason for confidentiality, such as a safeguarding issue, and there are others, but this is not something which has to be kept confidential. So Councillor Trent, I hope that helps you to understand why people earlier who have spoken have said that they were asked to keep it confidential. Perhaps you were one of the lucky ones. Perhaps you were not asked to keep it confidential. Perhaps you were able to share it with your residents. I'd also like to pick on Councillor Mike Green's point, and I absolutely agree with what he has said. The amendment that Councillor Earl has made is about tranche 2. Now, officers have clearly stated that they do intend to allow consultation for tranche 2. But tranche 1 has not even taken place yet in our ward, our Talbot and Branksome Woods ward. It's not going to be there until the 7th of September. And then there's going to be a 6-month, I understand, a 6-month trial of that scheme. And let's be in no doubt that it is actually a road closure, whatever you might like to call it, a modal point or whatever the term is. It is actually a road closure. And I actually have that in confirmation form from an officer that these schemes are road closures to stop people being able to travel from one main road to another through a residential area. So let's not be in any doubt about that. Let's not obfuscate that, please. So the point is that in the tranche 2 funding, there's a sum of about 250k, I believe, which is to confirm the tranche 1 schemes. So where is the opportunity, apart from some messaging that may go out from comms about the scheme which is already in place, there is no opportunity to oversee what is happening. And I am really, really concerned about that and about the tranche 2. As Councillor Mike Green has said, there could be an absolute democratic deficit in consultation. And it's not actually just about it being in our wards, is it? What might happen in Westbourne will affect Talbot and Branksome Woods ward. What might happen in Winton will affect Talbot and Branksome Woods ward. So it's not just about us hearing what's happening in our own ward, it's about neighbouring wards as well. And it's all very well for Councillor Slade and Hadley to suddenly develop slopey shoulders and say this is all down to the officers. No, I'm sorry, they are the cabinet and they made the instructions that these schemes could not be shared with our residents, and that is shocking. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rampton. Colleagues, we've got a proposal in front of us, and I'm just wondering if there are any further colleagues that wish to comment on the proposal that's made by Councillor Slade before we move on to anything further. However, I think on the chat there has been a suggested clarification, I suppose, from Councillor Mike Green, which has been accepted by Councillor Earl to that recommendation. Councillor Green, I don't know, you want to just nip in now and just explain the clarification which Councillor Earl has accepted, just to inform those that aren't on the chat. Councillor Green?
Sorry, I was hoping that Councillor Earl might, but I think probably the wording needs to be that ward councillors for the ward in which the scheme is proposed, and do we want to make it and adjacent wards are involved or consulted with, I don't know what the right word is, at the earliest available opportunity.
Thank you very much, and I think Councillor Earl has agreed to that, clarification.
Just for clarification, that does not need to wait until the government funding is approved. It's as soon really as the proposal is being worked on and is likely to go to government for approval, if that's okay with Councillor Earl.
Councillor Earl, happy with that?
Yes, yeah, happy to include that as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak, but I was going to come back and speak before the vote, if that's okay.
I've got a point of order from Councillor Farquhar about the portfolio holder coming in. I have actually checked with Democratic Services on that, and members of the committee can only participate as of right when we're in the process of this discussion, which is why, and this is a traditional thing that we've always done, kept as the board members, except when questions are directed. In which case, I think I don't have any further people messaging that they would like to speak, so I'll go back to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just to respond to Councillor Trent and some of the other councillors who raised the issue of confidentiality, I just wanted to raise that in Newtown and Heavlands, in this ward, we had an issue where a council contractor who was relaying one of the rows showed shop owners plans for one of the Emergency Active Travel Fund schemes, and he basically told her it was a done deal when it wasn't. And that created a whole furore around, this scheme, simply because they hadn't been told about it. There hadn't been any consultation. I hadn't even been told about it at that point either. And it all could have been avoided had it been shared with the councillors first, who could have then engaged on it. And that's what I think is really, really important about putting in this engagement with ward councillors. And what it also meant was that it makes the council, it pulls the council into disrepute. It makes them look incompetent. It makes them look unable to manage these things, which I guess in a way, the contractor brought upon us. But really, it just shows the importance of using corporate comms to manage reactions, using councillors to help explain and manage reactions, and really to bring the whole of our wards and our residents and stakeholders and business owners and all sorts along with us to these decisions. So I just wanted to use that as an example of why I think it is actually reasonable to say this is confidential for now. Here's your chance to have a say. Now we're going to take it to corporate comms to talk about who can deliver it to the public in a really manageable way. And finally, just to say, I do agree with Councillor Green's point. I think as early as possible engagement is perfectly reasonable. I would certainly not want to have not been consulted for something in my ward, and I think it's really important that councillors do have that opportunity to engage right from the start, but also in a meaningful way so that they enter it with an open mind, which I'm sure all of our councillors would do, but just so there is that bit of transparency and that bit of involvement so that councillors can represent and speak on behalf of residents and also help make the scheme better if there's an opportunity to do that. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Earl, and we'll move on to Councillor Green's points in a moment. But colleagues, we have a proposal in front of us which has been duly seconded, which is to propose a amendment to the Cabinet report, as has been previously discussed and expanded upon in the bar. What I will do is go to ask if there's any members that are intending to vote against that. If they are, please indicate in the message bar, and if that is the case, I'll go to recorded vote. If not, then we'll carry that forward as a formal unanimous recommendation. Councillor Bartlett will be voting against. Okay. In which case, let's go. If I could pass over to Bob, and we'll go to the vote on this. Thank you, Bob. Yes, thank you.
Chairman, do you want me to say anything more about this?
I think we've all got a very good grasp on the proposal in front of us, so if I could just ask you to go to recorded vote.
Chairman, it'd be useful if Bob could just quickly repeat.
Sorry, yes. In which case, Bob, if you could clarify for the purposes, that'd be very helpful.
Chairman, I think that what we're now going to vote on is going back to Councillor Earl's rewording of the recommendation, but changing it slightly. I think Councillor Earl agreed to this to read at the end, and ward councillors and adjacent ward councillors to be consulted at earliest possible opportunity.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing a nod from Councillor Earl on that. In which case, yes, that is what we are proposing.
So I'll do the roll call now. Am I coming over clearly to members in terms of my audio? Take that as a yes. So I'll do a roll call now then. So it's if you want to vote for, against, or abstain to those wordings which I've just read out.
Chair.
Yes. Sorry, Councillor Bartlett. Apologies, didn't see that. Councillor Bartlett.
Sorry, Chair, but I'm not clear on what the recommendation is that we're going to be voting on. Could Mr. Hanton please read it out so I understand what is being proposed? Thank you.
So we're proposing that looking at the cabinet recommendation. So we're saying we're proposing 1 is okay and 2 is okay, but we add to the end of 2 the words "and ward councillors and adjacent ward councillors to be consulted at earliest possible opportunity."
Thank you, Bob. So,
but
Chair,
that if you don't mind me saying, that's contrary actually to what the recommendation 2 is saying, because it's actually saying the decision making, not consultation. It's talking about the decision.
Okay. Just give us all a second to read the wording, and then we can come back on that point, I think. So I think if apologies, I'm paraphrasing you, Councillor Bartlett, but you're saying that because the wording is actually approving the delegation of decision making once the application has been successful, it's not really possible at that point to stick the words on the end that we should be consulted beforehand. Is that, am I being correct?
Yeah, what I'm saying, Chair, is that the recommendation 2, the decision should be delegated to the Director of Growth and Infrastructure and the portfolio holder and ward and adjacent councillors. So the decision making is made by all of those.
Okay.
No, Chairman, sorry, sorry, you can't delegate a power to a local member.
So, Chairman, it's Graham Farrant here. Technically, I think the delegation should be to the officer in consultation with. So normally be in consultation with the portfolio holders. There's no reason, I think, why you couldn't say in consultation with the portfolio holder, having consulted with ward councillors or something like that, but I'm not sure if that fits in the sentence. But yeah, the formal delegation is to the officer normally.
Yeah, that might well be. If I think that potentially is a good way to overcome it. If it's in consultation with portfolio holders who will have consulted with, and then the wording that we're talking about. So it's a kind of retrospective, if that makes sense. Does that cover the issue?
Chair, are you talking to me?
Yeah, well, go ahead, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, okay. No, I understand that from Mr. Farrant. So, yeah, I think it's fine as long as we understand that the portfolio holder and the ward councillors are making those consultations together and making that decision together for the officer to enact. That's what I wouldn't want to see, for example, there to be a disagreement between the ward councillors and the portfolio holder, and the portfolio holder's view takes precedent in some way. So that's why I'm trying to make sure that the ward councillors do actually have an equal say in those decisions.
Okay. Councillor Mike Green wishes to come in.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I can absolutely see and would love it to be exactly what Councillor Bartlett is suggesting, but realistically, in an executive arrangement that we have, the decision can't be delegated effectively to ward councillors. It has to stay with the executive. I think that's pretty much where what Mr. Farrant was saying. However, I just wonder whether we need to have, if you like, actually it to be an additional recommendation, which is that ward councillors and adjacent ward councillors are consulted at the very earliest stage possible, and leaving the second recommendation as it stands. I'm not proposing that. I'm just suggesting that might be a decent way forward, and I'd be interested to hear what you, Chairman, or what officers or others have to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. I'll go to Councillor Millie Earle back again. It was what I was going to suggest as well, actually. The clearest way would be to have the wording that she had as a separate recommendation to Cabinet rather than an amendment to the Cabinet report. But I'll go back to you, Councillor Earle.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say, I'd be very happy with the word following. So consultation with in consultation with portfolio holder, following consultation with ward councillors. Just to sort of, because I feel like that works. Am I right in thinking that?
Okay, well, thank you, Councillor. It does resolve the one of the issues and inevitably creates others. But I'll go to other colleagues who have requested to speak. Councillor Bartlett, you wish to come back, and then Councillor Brooke.
Yes, thank you, Chair. No, I think Councillor Miliol has said is okay. I mean, what I'm hoping to avoid is a repetition of the huge public backlash that we've had over the schemes that have already been proposed, where which also it does seem that those schemes have not been supported by ward councillors as well. I've never seen the numbers of people complaining about something the council has done, and basically those decisions have already been made by officers and approved by the portfolio holder. I'm afraid that doesn't fill me with a huge amount of confidence, and so I would hate for those things to repeat itself. And this is why I'm really digging my heels in about making sure that anything that is goes ahead is with the agreement of the ward councillors, which hopefully will reflect residents' views that are directly affected by that.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Guys, I'm very conscious of timing. We've got a proposal in front of us, which has been amended to use the term following, which essentially would require the cabinet member to consult. Councillor Bartlett would wish to go further, but I think that's probably not in the spirit of the recommendation that Councillor Earle has put forward, and maybe a separate issue. So my suggestion would be, I know I've got a lot of people wishing to speak, but I think we move forward now with the vote on the recommendation that's the revised, the amendment to the cabinet paper proposal that's in front of us. So Bob, could I pass back to you for a roll call, please? Roll call, please.
Okay, so I'll do the roll call now then. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Anderson.
Abstain.
Councillor Bartlett.
Against.
Councillor Broadhead.
For.
Councillor Brooke.
For.
Councillor Earle.
For.
Councillor Farquhar.
For.
Councillor Fear.
For.
Councillor M. Green.
For.
Councillor N. Green.
For.
Councillor Haynes.
For.
Councillor Mellor.
For.
Councillor Miles.
For.
Councillor Trent.
For.
Councillor Rampton.
Abstain.
Councillor Northover.
For.
Thank you, everyone.
If I may, Chair, I'd like my vote to be recorded, please.
Thank you very much. Right, so that motion is, that proposal is carried, and I can take that on behalf of the board to the next cabinet meeting as a suggested amendment to the cabinet paper for their consideration. Very, very conscious of time because it's only an hour until our next meeting, but I'm aware that we did have another proposal that was raised. So shall I revert to Councillor Nicola Green, who had an additional proposal that she wished to make. Councillor Green?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm about to put it in the chat. And for those who are watching and unable to see that, I will read it. The Overview and Scrutiny Panel expresses its disappointment at the lack of engagement with ward councillors who were prevented from onward consultation with their communities. It believes that this democratic deficit significantly increased the concern and confusion which inevitably followed among the public. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. Do I have a seconder for that proposal?
Chairman, I believe Councillor May Haynes may or will have offered some time ago.
Time is yes, perfect. That's great. Thank you, Councillor Haynes, for. Oh gosh, apologies. I pushed mute on myself. Colleagues, do I have any other? We've got a new proposal which has been proposed and seconded. I've got lots of requests this week previously, but could I essentially refresh all of those? And anybody else that would like to request to speak on this proposal, indicate now. Councillor Farquhar.
Second, Chair, it's very kind of you. I'm not supporting this proposal for the reason that it demonstrates precisely what's happened on the ground, is that without it being clearly communicated, people have been opposed to it, people have decided different things, they've had their own interpretation, etc. I don't think that this proposal adds any value, and I think it's trying to fix something which may well have been broken, but I don't think this particular paper is the correct place to raise it. So I won't be supporting this particular proposal.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farquhar. Councillor Mike Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. You just caught me with a biscuit in my mouth, so apologies. I won't be supporting.
Yes, unless you've already finished it.
I won't be supporting this motion. I believe that Councillor Hadley gave an adequate explanation earlier on in terms of while the schemes were being developed, then that is not the time to actually inform members of the public at all. You have to wait until the scheme is completed. I also believe very much that ward councillors were engaged. They were given an opportunity to make comments and offer suggestions in the first instance from the 10th of May about various changes that would help in the social distancing. The government only announced the scheme on the 27th of May or thereabouts, which was 13 weeks ago, with only 1 week in front. So we are being given a lot of misleading information today from some members, and also in leaflets that are going out amongst the public. And I don't think it's right that that sort of information should actually be sent to the public, giving totally misleading information. It's the responsibility of us councillors to ensure that correct and accurate information is actually issued to the public, and that could only operate once schemes have been finalised in tranche 1. And at the end of the day, Councillor Challoner made a very, very significant point when he said their scheme had not been introduced yet, so we don't know how it is going to work. That's the whole point. Any comments that come in prior to the scheme being implemented are based upon assumptions, perhaps false information or misleading information, and we do need those six months to collect evidence that supports or contradicts the value of the proposals and the schemes. So if I can just give a couple of examples, I referred in my declarations to my daughter and where she lives. She's seen the scheme. She thinks that she needs to go out one way and can't go out to the other end of her road, but recognises that there's the potential for traffic congestion on the main road, but at the same time would improve the residential conditions in her own road. So how is she going to actually make a sensible evaluative comment without seeing what happens? And that's where I asked for a clarification from the portfolio holder, because it's been said today that some of these roads are closed to traffic, i.e. you can't go from one main road through to another. That might be the case, but is it not also the case that the residents still have access to their own road, even though the road entrance at the so-called closed end has only been narrowed? I don't know what the position is there. That would be useful to have a clarification from the portfolio holder. But I can't support the motion because it is a responsibility for us, as I have said earlier in the previous situation, that we should be involved in these things ourselves all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from that last point, I do take some great disappointment from what Councillor Brooks just said in terms of there being misleading information here and what's actually going out. Coming back to what's been recommended here, this scheme has been handled abysmally by the politicians of the Unity Alliance. We and residents are absolutely disappointed. So it's right to put it. It's right to put it in there. We have been told by both the leader of the council and the portfolio holder that we are not allowed. Let's quote again. It's embargoed, privileged information. We don't want unstructured early queries, and both Andy Hadley. We've just heard. We were also told by the leader, I think Councillor Rampton mentioned it, and I quote directly by Vicky Slade, "We have asked, but it is not shared with residents directly." We are absolutely appalled, and residents are absolutely appalled in how this has been handled. I do, I'm highly supportive in principle of a lot of these schemes, and just back to the earlier discussion, the amount of work the officers must have put into this must have been absolutely immense. So absolutely, will I and do I thank them. But we're only looking through, the Alliance is only looking through one lens. It's not an equalities lens. We've heard about disabled people, blind schools, GP practices have come back, when these schemes have been unveiled. They're not looking for an economic lens. We've had our hoteliers up in arms, our tourist industry up in arms. Even consultation light would have aided these schemes greatly. It beggars belief that when we've already had one U-turn because it was a blatant scheme that didn't take into account the economic industry or hospitality industry, and you've got Hadley and Slade doubling down on no consultation. It's absolutely, in my view, and in the view of many residents, this leadership has brought the council into disrepute. You've had the deputy leader of the council, Mark Howell, say, and again I quote, "You need to get people out of their cars whether they like it or not." Again, I quote from him, "You can always order online." You've had George Farquhar say today, residents have picked up the wrong end of the stick. You've had, that's from the Labour Party. You've had, the Liberal Party, Councillor Trent called the government muppets. These comments do nothing to the standard of this debate, and I believe, the administration have severely lost the plot here, and I completely endorse, the recommendation in front of us. And I just finish up. I believe. The non-extreme pro-consultation members of the Alliance really need to look at themselves and what is being done in their name at the moment, because it's absolutely disgraceful.
Councillor Miller. I have two final people wishing to speak, and then I will take it back to Councillor Nicola Green just to sum up, and then we will go to the vote on this proposal. So I have Councillor Mike Green and Councillor Millie Earle. Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Brooke pointed out, there was a 10th of May email, which only goes to show that this was telegraphed earlier. People knew this was coming. On the 5th of June, as I outlined in the timetable earlier, these plans were submitted to government. There was plenty of opportunity for this administration, the portfolio holders, because I don't know what happened within their own groups, I don't know what happened within the cabinet, but there was plenty of opportunity to bring these schemes forward to ward councillors and for them either to cascade it down or to or the council or the administration could have involved the hoteliers, the residents and everyone else earlier. It chose not to. We heard from Councillor Rampton exactly the words that came from Councillor Slade and from the officers. Do not speak to your residents about this, and we were told exactly the same. Yes, we were given an opportunity well before it came forward to come out with ideas. Yes, we were told there might be something happening on the East Cliff. I'm very happy to see improvements for pedestrians and cyclists in the East Cliff. What I wasn't prepared to see was a sort of madcap scheme that came forward that would have blighted residents' lives and killed off hotels. That was what it was all about, and that was the opportunity that was missed. And if we come back again to Councillor Brooks's suggestion that we've got to do it first before we ask people, well, that's exactly what is wrong with the way that this has been handled and why it is right that this proposal should go forward so we can show that that was the incorrect way for the administration to behave.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Final comment from Councillor Earle. Councillor Earle.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think just to speak on Councillor Green's point there in response, this is, power devolved from government to local authorities. It's a change in the way that things are done. So, before things have been consulted on before they happen. If they get a really negative response, they don't happen at all. Whereas this is, it's experimental. It's not that it's permanent. It's still temporary in that sense, but it gives people an opportunity to see if something works. Not just the council, but also residents. So I really disagree with this idea that we're closing roads forever, or the Unity Alliance or the portfolio holders have made these decisions, because they are not. They're just decisions to consult on something with evidence ongoing and being able to do it in an informed way. But just to say very quickly, really, that I feel the previous motion or amendment to recommendation covers the engagement of ward councillors, and they are essentially elected to act on behalf of residents as part of a representative democracy. And like Councillor Miller said, we shouldn't be descending into political point scoring, especially on this board. So going forward, anything around that original point of engaging ward members is just political conjecture, which doesn't add value to this paper anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Earle. I'll go back to Councillor Nicola Green, and then we'll take the vote on this one, and then we'll carry on the discussion if there is any further discussion, including from hearing from Councillor Hadley after that vote. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, colleagues, for your responses. There's an element of sadness to this, because this appears to me to be an exercise in clutching defeat from the jaws of victory. There was an opportunity to implement some great schemes. Some of them may indeed be great schemes, but there has been it's been botched in its handling. It has not gone well. I find the let's suck it and see approach with public funds frankly disingenuous. The idea that we should just chuck a few experimental planters in the middle of the road and see what happens is really not the way to go about respecting the views of our residents, our businesses, our schools and other stakeholders. And I just think it's been handled in a cack-handed and inept way, if I'm honest. And I am disappointed because it may well tarnish some of the schemes which might be challenging and with proper consultation could well have been considered and brought real advantages. But I'm afraid the failure to consider the views and the impacts of people like the Bournemouth Blind Society, the failure even to recognise that they might have been consulted, and our schools in whose name this is being done, is what's brought me to make this proposal, Chairman. I will continue to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nicola Green. Bob, could I pass over to you? We've got a proposal in front of us which we've has been duly seconded. Colleagues can see the text again if they like. But Bob, I wonder if you could take us through the roll call again, and we'll go to the vote on this.
Yep. Okay, Chairman. This is for, against, or abstain again. Councillor Anderson.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Broadhead.
For.
Councillor Brooke.
Against.
Councillor Earl.
Against.
Councillor Farquhar.
Against, and I'd like my vote recorded, please, and with my previous amendment vote.
Yes, I noted that last time. I've got it again. Councillor Fear.
For.
Councillor Green M.
For.
Councillor Green N.
For.
Councillor Haynes.
For.
Councillor Miller.
For.
Councillor Miles.
Abstain.
Councillor Trent.
Abstain.
Councillor Rampton.
For.
Councillor Northover.
Against.
And that concludes the vote, Chairman. 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9 for, 4 against, and 2 abstentions.
Thank you very much, Bob. I will take that on behalf of the board to Cabinet as the next Cabinet meeting on the 9th of September, along with the previous agreed recommended amendment to that Cabinet paper, both of which, interestingly, were about consultation of ward members. Colleagues, I'm very conscious that we have another meeting in 45 minutes. Are there any other points that colleagues wish to raise on this particular issue? I'm quite happy to bring Councillor Hadley back in at this point to make any comments. Obviously, they'll be taken through to Cabinet anyway. Councillor Hadley, anything else you wish to add?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm actually really disappointed in this, and obviously we will take this through to Cabinet. The Department for Transport guidance was really clear. The consultation comes after the implementation. I tried really hard to engage ward councillors, to suggest to officers that we fit in engagement with ward councillors. The issue that Karen Rampton says, yes, that was in email, and it was because she came to me for clarification. I gave her the clarification, and I said, given this is an engineering drawing and you've struggled to access it, it's not the appropriate thing for the public. And the reason why it wasn't for sharing was because it was engineering drawings, not the much simpler drawings that have been issued through comms, and that was the reason for that. I also did informal consultation for Evening Hill and Keyhole with the ward councillors in those wards, and before. And in terms of the 7 days to shortlist, which Mr. Pincroft mentioned, those schemes were shortlisted by officers, and they came to me the day before implementation. I have worked really hard through this whole process to try and get engagement. I also met with Nigel Hedges on the Moordown scheme. So where councillors have come forward and said they got queries, I have been very proactive in working with the officers to do that. As I said in my short piece at the start, the officers have worked really hard. Absolutely, we want to engage with ward councillors in tranche 2. It's a very different process. We have time to do that. I also want to see, and part of what we've done in being quite generic in the schemes that we're putting forward, a much richer engagement directly with the public. and through ward councillors on what are the best elements in those schemes. And as part of that, it was me that got Widen My Path promoted through this area to give people an opportunity to put on the web issues that they had with walking and cycling routes. It's great that Councillor Nicola Green is out on her bike, and as has been suggested, a lot of these routes, a lot of the people that are walking and cycling are not in their own wards. And I've had many responses by email to the various schemes, and actually quite a few quite disappointed about the Southbourne and Boscombe one being cancelled, because they pass through that area. They struggle along through the sand in the winter, and obviously the very congested area in the summer on the Undercliff, and felt the Overcliff was a good scheme. But I recognised, and we pulled the scheme because we need to also recognise the impacts further inland. It's a construct of the way in which government did tranche 1 urgently. They did that because, as you heard from the bus companies, they were told, or in fact, as you was predicted before I heard it from the bus companies, that they were down to 10% of capacity. And this was about trying to make sure we didn't get to total gridlock with people all being in their cars. So we responded diligently, urgently to those demands from government, and I would have loved to have more ward engagement. I tried to get that. That was something that the officers didn't feel they had time to do. It's also been with the with summer holidays and all those sorts of things. Again, the members of the team to actually get the work done has been a real challenge, and we've been trying to do our best. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. A few final people with comment, then we'll have to close the meeting. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to, because people viewing at home, of which I think there's only 22, haven't got access to the sidebar. The point which I wanted to raise is that when members are speaking on this board, if they refer to other members just by their surname rather than prefixing it with the word councillor, which is their elected representative of their wards, I find that to be rude and disparaging. And I would ask you, as chair, just to remind members of this board, is that while trying to make your point, then that is no reason to be rude and disparaging of another member by not using their appropriate title in front of their surname.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. I'm sure it's not intentional. There's a lot of people very impassioned about this particular issue. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back over the whole debate with the with what's happened, I think it's been quite robust actually in going through the details from Councillor Hadley and how he's seen the process go through this kind of first stage, as we will, and on the second side of all the members of this panel. I think it's kind of a at the moment how everything's gone about. I feel you know, there's definitely room for improvement. And I feel, granted, the timescale is the timescale, and we have to work with that. We all understand that. We do that in our own jobs, and you know, working with residents. We completely understand how sensitive timescales are. But we are living in very different times than we were, and this is how we need to adapt. And this, I think, shows for hopefully the next round and going forward with these schemes, is how we do contact, how we do have communication with our fellow councillors. So, for example, we do have the technology now to have very quick meetings set up, to not go along or even just briefing with certain councillors. We have these tools at our disposal now. I feel like we've done really good work in having most of our meetings held over the coronavirus lockdown. And I think that's a testament to BCP Council. But I feel in this instance we may have missed the trick with that. So I look forward to going forward with actually having using these tools that we have, so we can have these meetings set up so residents that are then linked in with the ward councillors actually get the information they need. So that's what I would say. It's first run's not been too good, but I'm looking forward to the next run, which I'm sure will be much better. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Last comment, Councillor.
I've lost you, Chair. Did you call me?
I called you, Councillor Trent.
Oh, right. I didn't catch you. It just suddenly went silent. I just really wanted to say that the last statement that Councillor Green made did the same thing which has been happening over and over again throughout this. It's roughly akin to shooting the postman because he delivers a letter you don't agree with and not taking any action on where the letter came from. The scheme with its ridiculous tight timings came about from government, and there should really be some aiming at putting together schemes that don't allow adequate public consultation, because once you're stuck with a situation and you need to deliver some things, then, you know, if that's a scheme that's available, you've got to kind of accept it. And what I think is ridiculous is that it's shooting the person who's delivering the message. It's not actually shooting the person who wrote the message. And so I do really think that we shouldn't be, you know, because there's going to be lots of instances of this coming up in coming months or years, that we can't let a government that's kind of sitting there, not even putting things through Parliament, coming up with schemes and projects that you then end up attacking the people locally who are delivering it. I really do think that we ought to target those that start these harebrained schemes and not the ones that find themselves wanting to get things done but are stuck with a system which doesn't allow enough time to do adequate consultation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trent. I think we might be confusing a number of issues here. But, you know, the thing here as a chair, I've noticed the debate hasn't been. I haven't had one member of the board actually criticising the ability to have these very quick powers. And actually, I think it was almost a unanimous theme of the debate was that they are, in their essence, welcomed. I think what the central part of the debate has been, in particular with ward colleagues and ward councillors, and at what point they are included in the discussion, because I think, as a number of speakers have pointed out, some of the there are probably some minor amendments to some of these schemes that ward colleagues would maybe have been able to inform that may well have improved their success rate. But either way, we've had a very full discussion on this. I wish to thank all of the contributors to the debate and the Cabinet member as well. I have two formal recommendations to take forward to Cabinet on the 9th of September, one of which is a recommended amendment to the Cabinet paper, and another one is a separate item, a separate recommendation from the Overview and Scrutiny Board. We have another meeting in the second meeting, which will deal with the rest of the chosen Cabinet reports which are looking to scrutinise, which starts at 6 o'clock. It seems unlikely I'm going to be able to join that through to data allowance on my dongle, so I'll probably be passing over to Councillor Haynes to chair that meeting. So thank you all very much for joining. I'm closing the debate, and that finishes the first meeting, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you very much indeed.